You stand at the edge of morning, where the air carries the scent of smoke and wet earth, and the cold presses against your face like a living thing. The sky is pale, a wash of gray that holds no promise of warmth, and beneath your feet the ground is hard, unyielding, as though the world itself has drawn inward against the season. You are here, in this place between memory and knowing, where the past unfolds not as distant spectacle but as lived experience, as though you have always been here, wrapped in the quiet struggle of survival, learning what it means to meet winter without yielding to it. This is a story about covering. About the layers that stood between human skin and oblivion. About wool and fur and hide, and how they became more than material, how they became armor, sanctuary, the difference between a family huddled through January and a family lost to it. It is a story told in textures, in the weight of things worn and carried, in the knowledge passed from hand to hand across centuries that left little written but much remembered in the body's own language of warmth and cold. Before we begin, before you step fully into the world of those who learned to wear winter like a second skin, let me invite you to join a small community of others who, like you, seek rest in the company of stories that move slowly, that ask nothing of you but your presence. Subscribe, if you wish, to receive these journeys into quieter knowledge, into histories told not for urgency but for understanding, for the gentle accumulation of knowing that settles over you like snow, soft and continuous, so that you may grow wiser even as you descend into the deep and necessary country of sleep. There is no obligation, only the open door, the offer of more evenings like this one, where learning and rest are not enemies but companions. Now, you are standing in cold that has a color, blue, perhaps, or silver, though not the silver of coins but of frozen breath, of light that has forgotten how to bring heat. The year does not matter yet. It could be 1,000 years ago, or 5,000, or 10. The place is somewhere north, where winter is not a season but a fact, a condition that shapes everything, the length of daylight, the height of walls, the thickness of what you wear. You are dressed, but barely. In your mind's eye you can feel what the first peoples felt before they learned the secrets you are about to discover, skin exposed, vulnerable, the cold finding every gap, every opening, turning fingers numb, stealing thought from the mind, pulling heat from the core until the body itself becomes confused, sluggish, a machine winding down. You have seen this, perhaps, in small ways, a winter walk taken too lightly, the shock of wind through inadequate cloth. But here, now, you are being asked to imagine it fully, to understand that cold was not discomfort but danger, not inconvenience but the central problem around which entire lives were built. Around you, others move through the half-light. They are your people, though that word is large and imprecise. They are the ones who share your fire, your shelter, your knowledge. Some are kin by blood, others by proximity and need. There are no nations yet, no borders, only the small circles of belonging that form around warmth and the sharing of food. These people are wrapped in what looks, to your modern eye, like assemblages of texture and weight, furs with the hair still attached, skins cured and softened, rough-woven fabrics made from fibers you do not yet recognize. They move with a deliberateness born of understanding that every action in winter has consequence, that haste leads to sweat, and sweat, in this cold, is a slow poison. You watch an elder, a woman whose face carries the map of many winters, as she adjusts the fur around a child's shoulders. Her hands are patient, thorough. She tucks one edge under another, overlapping layers, creating pockets of air that will hold warmth the way a cup holds water. She does not speak, but the child stands still, knows the ritual, has performed it and had it performed upon them enough times that it is simply what one does before going outside, like breathing, like waking. This is not fashion. This is not adornment. This is the practical poetry of not dying, refined over generations into something that looks almost graceful. The question that hums beneath everything is simple: how did we learn this? How did fragile, hairless creatures, born without the thick pelts of wolves or the insulating blubber of seals, learn to survive in places that seem designed to exclude us? The answer lies in observation, in necessity, in the slow accumulation of trial and error and the passing down of what worked. It lies in the moment someone first understood that the skin of a killed animal could be more than meat's container, that it could be separated, cleaned, worn. That the warmth the animal had known in life could be borrowed, stolen, inherited by the hunter. You can almost see it, if you let the scene unfold in the quietest part of your imagination, a figure crouched beside a fresh kill, the steam rising from open flesh into winter air, the sudden realization not born of inspiration but of cold hands seeking warmth, touching the fur, feeling the heat still trapped there, understanding in the body before the mind named it that here was an answer. The animal's warmth could continue, could transfer, could save. But taking a skin and wearing it are separated by knowledge, by technique, by the hard-won understanding of how to transform hide from something that will rot and stiffen into something pliable, durable, wearable. This knowledge did not arrive whole. It came in pieces, across seasons and mistakes and small victories. Someone learned that scraping away the fat and flesh kept the skin from spoiling as quickly. Someone else discovered that certain soaking processes, perhaps the animal's own brain, mashed and worked into the hide, made the leather soft. Another learned that smoke could preserve, could keep insects away, could add a final durability that meant the difference between a skin lasting 1 season or 5. You are not merely watching this history. You are inhabiting it. The pronouns have shifted, anchored themselves in you. You are the one learning, the one standing in the cold, the one whose survival depends on the thickness and craft of what you wear. This is the gift of the second person, the invitation to step out of observation and into experience, to feel the weight of fur across your shoulders not as metaphor but as sensation, as the pressure of survival made tangible. In the shelter behind you, a structure of stacked stone and timber and packed earth, designed to hold heat the way a body holds blood, there are skins in various stages of preparation. Some are stretched on frames, scraped clean, drying in the dim interior where a fire burns low and constant. Others are bundled, waiting for the hands that will soften them, will work them hour after hour until the fibers loosen, until the hide becomes supple enough to move with the body rather than against it. This work is quiet, repetitive, meditative in its own way. It is often done by firelight, in the hours when the wind outside makes any other activity impossible, when the only sensible thing is to sit close to warmth and let the hands be busy. You have done this work, or you remember doing it, or you are about to do it. The tense shifts because in this place, this imaginative reconstruction, time is less linear than layered. You hold a skin across your knees, and you work it with a smooth stone, pressing, pulling, feeling for the places where stiffness remains. The rhythm is soothing. The motion engages the body without exhausting it. Around you, others do the same, and there is little conversation, only the sound of scraping, of breathing, of the fire's low crackle. This is how winter was survived, not in grand battles against the cold but in the accumulation of small, patient acts that prepared the body's defenses one skin at a time. Fur is different from hide, though they come from the same source. Fur is the animal's own insulation, the layer it grew to survive the same cold you now face. When you wear fur with the hair intact, you are not just covering your skin, you are adding a system of warmth that nature designed, each hair a tiny trap for air, and air, when still and held close, is among the finest insulators known. You learn this not from books but from experience, from the difference between wearing scraped leather and wearing fur, from the nights when one keeps you alive and the other merely keeps you covered. But fur requires even more care. It must be kept dry, or it mats and loses its ability to trap air. It must be cleaned, shaken free of ice crystals that form from your own breath and sweat. It must be stored properly when not in use, away from the insects and larvae that would devour it, that see it as food rather than clothing. You learn to respect fur not as luxury but as technology, as a solution to a problem so fundamental that its failure means death. Wool enters the story later, after the domestication of sheep, after humans learned to keep animals not just for their meat and skins but for the fibers that could be shorn season after season without killing. Wool is a different miracle. It insulates even when wet, unlike fur. It can be spun into thread, woven into cloth, shaped into garments that fit the body more precisely than any stitched hide. But wool requires agriculture, settlement, the shift from following herds to keeping them. It belongs to a slightly later chapter of human ingenuity, though still ancient, still measured in millennia. For now, here in this earlier cold, you rely on what can be hunted and gathered. Fur and skin. The rabbit, the deer, the elk. In the far north, the caribou, the seal, the bear. Each animal offers something different. Rabbit is soft, light, but not as durable. Deer is strong, workable, available. Caribou has hollow hair that traps air with extraordinary efficiency. Seal skin is waterproof, essential in places where cold comes not just from air but from water, from wet snow and freezing rain that would soak through anything else. Bear fur is thick, heavy, a luxury of warmth for those who can bring down such a creature, though the danger of hunting bear is its own cost. You learn to read animals not just as food but as wardrobes, as resource maps. You learn which furs are best for outer layers, which skins for inner, which combinations create pockets of warm air without trapping moisture that will freeze against your skin. You learn that layering is not just adding thickness but engineering a system, each piece serving a function, the innermost against the skin, soft and breathable, the middle for insulation, the outer to break wind and shed snow. This knowledge is communal. It belongs to everyone and to no one. It is shared around fires, taught to children as they grow, demonstrated by the simple fact of survival. Those who dress well live. Those who do not, do not. The learning curve is steep and unforgiving, but over generations the knowledge accumulates, becomes refined, approaches something like mastery. By the time you enter this story, it is already old wisdom, already proven, already saved countless lives across countless winters. The making of winter clothing is not fast. A single garment, a coat, a pair of leggings, can take weeks to construct. First the hunting, then the butchering, then the curing, then the softening, then the cutting, then the sewing. Thread is made from sinew, the connective tissue of animals, dried and split into fine strands stronger than plant fiber. Needles are carved from bone, polished smooth, thin enough to pierce hide without tearing it. Each stitch is placed with care, overlapped to keep water out, reinforced at stress points where movement will pull and strain the seams. You have sewn, in this long imagining. You have sat with a half-finished coat across your lap, needle in hand, pulling sinew through layered hide, feeling the resistance and then the give as the thread passes through. Your fingers ache. The light is dim. But the work continues because the alternative is unthinkable. The coat will be worn by your child, or your partner, or yourself. It will stand between warm flesh and winter wind. It must be strong. It must be whole. There is no room for carelessness. As you sew, you sometimes think about the animal that gave this skin. Not with guilt, exactly, but with a kind of acknowledgement. The animal lived, moved, felt the same cold you feel. Now it has given more than meat. It has given protection, continuation. There is a relationship here, one that does not fit neatly into modern categories of use and exploitation. It is older than ethics, more fundamental than philosophy. It is need meeting resource, and the resource is honored precisely because the need is so absolute. The child you dressed earlier is outside now, visible through the low doorway of the shelter. You can see them moving through the snow, small and bundled, only the face exposed, and even that partially wrapped. They are learning the same lessons you learned, the same ones learned by every generation in this place: how to move in winter, how to breathe so the cold does not sear the lungs, how to recognize the early signs of frostbite, how to return to warmth before the body begins its dangerous shutdown. The clothing they wear is a library of knowledge, every seam a sentence, every layer a paragraph in the long text of survival. Inside, the fire needs tending. You rise, move to the hearth, add wood carefully, not too much, not too little. Heat is as precious as food, sometimes more so. The wood was gathered in autumn, cut and stacked and dried, another form of preparation, another way of armoring against the season. Everything here is connected, each task supporting the next, the whole system a tightly woven net of precaution and foresight. Subscribe, if this way of knowing appeals to you, if the slow unfolding of how things came to be brings you a quiet satisfaction. Let these stories become your companions in the hour before sleep, when the mind is ready to wander but not to race, when facts and imagination can mingle into something both true and dreamlike. You will become wiser in small increments, gathering understanding the way snow gathers on a branch, gently, steadily, until you look up and realize how much has accumulated. You return to your place by the fire. Another skin waits. Your hands know what to do, moving almost without thought, guided by the knowledge that has soaked into muscle and memory. Outside, the wind rises, a low moan that vibrates through the walls. You do not fear it. You are dressed for it. Your people are dressed for it. The animals you hunt gave you their warmth, and you have transformed that gift into something wearable, something that allows you to walk out into the cold and return. This is the foundation. This is where the story begins, with cold, with need, with the first humans who looked at the winter and refused to retreat, who instead learned to meet it clothed in the gathered warmth of 1,000 small ingenuities. Wool will come. Weaving will come. Trade and specialization, and eventually the vast industry of textile production. But all of it begins here, in your hands, with the skin of an animal and the knowledge of how to make it something more. The light is fading outside, the brief winter day already surrendering to longer night. You do not mourn this. Night is simply another condition, another thing to prepare for. The fire will burn. The skins will keep their warmth. Tomorrow there will be more work, more preparation, the endless cycle of survival that is also, in its way, a kind of triumph. You settle deeper into your furs, feel their weight, their texture. They smell of smoke and earth and the faint musk of the animal they once were. This smell is comfort now, association built over years until the scent itself means safety, means warmth, means home. You close your eyes for a moment, not sleeping yet but resting, letting the heat soak into your bones, letting the day's small labors settle into the larger pattern of the season. Around you, the others do the same. The fire burns low. The wind continues outside, indifferent and eternal. But inside, wrapped in wool and fur and skin, surrounded by the gathered knowledge of generations, you are safe. You are warm. You have become, in your way, armored. Not for battle, but for winter. Not for glory, but for life. This is how it began. This is how it was. And now, together, we will unfold the long story of how these simple acts, skinning, curing, sewing, became the foundation of entire cultures, how the materials of winter armor shaped trade routes and migrations, how the knowledge of staying warm became one of the first and most essential technologies of human survival. But that unfolding will be slow, deliberate, paced to the rhythm of firelight and falling snow. There is no hurry. Winter teaches patience above all else. And so we will move forward as winter itself moves, steadily, quietly, with the accumulation of small details that build into understanding as snow builds into drifts, as days build into seasons, as generations build into history. Rest now, here at the beginning. Feel the furs around you. Feel the warmth they hold. Know that you are dressed for what comes next, that the armor you wear was earned through observation and effort and the slow, patient transformation of what the world provides into what the body needs. The story is just beginning. The cold is vast. But you are ready. You have always been ready. This is what it means to be human in winter, to take what is given, to transform it, to survive not through strength alone but through ingenuity, through the willingness to learn from the world and from each other, through the knowledge that warmth is not a luxury but a right we claim by our own hands, one skin at a time. You stand at the edge of morning, where the air tastes of smoke and frost, where the world has not yet decided whether it will yield or withhold. The light arrives slowly here, seeping through layers of cloud that hang low and heavy, the kind of sky that promises nothing but the quiet persistence of cold. You have learned to read these skies the way your hands have learned to read the texture of hide, the way your fingers can tell by touch alone whether a pelt will hold warmth or fail when the wind comes howling through the valley. This is not your first winter, though each one feels like a test you must pass again, as if the earth forgets what you have endured before and asks you to prove yourself anew. You have wrapped yourself this morning in layers that are not merely clothing but accumulation, memory made tangible, survival made wearable. Against your skin lies a tunic of wool, the fibers still holding faint traces of lanolin, that oily blessing that repels the first kiss of snow. Over this, a vest of rabbit fur, pieced together from dozens of small lives, each pelt no larger than your two hands pressed together, yet collectively they form a shell that traps your body's warmth and holds it close, a conspiracy between you and the animal world. The outermost layer is deerskin, tanned until it no longer remembers being flesh, transformed into something between leather and fabric, supple enough to move with you yet dense enough to break the wind. You have sewn this yourself, or perhaps your mother did, or her mother before her. The stitches are so old and so often repaired that origin has become irrelevant. What matters is that the seams hold, that the sinew thread does not snap when you bend to gather kindling, that the whole assemblage does not betray you when you step outside and the cold wraps around you like a living thing with intentions of its own. You are not alone in this place, though solitude is a frequent companion. The settlement where you live is small, a collection of structures that crouch low against the land, built with the understanding that height invites the wind's anger. There are perhaps 30 souls here, maybe fewer now that the old woman who lived at the far end passed in her sleep 2 weeks ago, her body discovered stiff and gray, the fire in her hearth long dead. She had been wearing every piece of clothing she owned, layered one atop the other, and still it had not been enough. The cold is democratic in its cruelty. It does not care for age or intention, only for the presence or absence of heat. You have known this since childhood, though the lessons came gently at first, wrapped in the routine of daily tasks. You remember being small, perhaps 5 or 6 winters old, watching your mother card wool by the fire, her hands moving with a rhythm that seemed eternal, inevitable. The raw fleece had come from the sheep that grazed the hillside in summer, animals that you knew by sight if not by name, their coats thick and greasy, their eyes placid and incurious. In autumn, before the cold arrived in earnest, the sheep were brought down and sheared, and the wool arrived in your home as a tangled, dirty mass that smelled of animal and earth and something faintly sweet beneath it all. Your mother had shown you how to tease the fibers apart, how to comb them until they aligned, how to spin them into thread that could be woven or knitted into fabric. The process was long, measured not in hours but in weeks, the work unfolding in the margins of other tasks, while stew simmered, while bread rose, while the wind tested the walls and found them, for the moment, sufficient. You had watched her hands and tried to imitate them, your own fingers clumsy at first, the wool slipping away or tangling into knots that made her laugh, a sound that was kind and patient and entirely without mockery. Now your hands know the work without thought, the muscle memory so deep that you can card and spin in near darkness, the motion automatic, a meditation that calms the mind while the body labors. You understand, in a way that goes beyond words, why wool became the fabric of survival for so many people across so many centuries. It is not the warmest material, for holds heat more fiercely, but it is forgiving. It retains warmth even when wet, unlike plant fibers that turn cold and clammy against the skin. It is abundant, renewable, a gift that sheep give year after year without dying. And it is adaptable, capable of being made into dense felt or airy knit, thick blankets or fine undergarments, each form suited to a different need. The sheep themselves are recent arrivals in the long span of human time, domesticated perhaps 10,000 years ago in the highlands of what you know only as distant places, lands you have never seen and likely never will. But the knowledge of their keeping has traveled, passed from community to community, carried by traders and migrants, by brides moving to new villages and captives learning the ways of their captors. The sheep that graze your hillside are the descendants of animals brought here generations ago, before your grandmother's grandmother was born, and they have adapted to this climate just as your people have, growing coats that thicken dramatically as autumn wanes, their bodies preparing for trials they instinctively understand. You have heard stories, told on long winter nights when there is nothing to do but feed the fire and pass the time with words, of earlier days when wool was not available, when people survived the cold with only the skins of animals they could hunt or trap. You try to imagine this, though it is difficult. Without sheep, without wool, the procurement of warmth would be a more desperate enterprise, entirely dependent on success in the hunt, on the presence and abundance of game. A bad hunting season would mean not only hunger but the very real possibility of freezing, of lacking the materials necessary to construct adequate shelter for the body. In those older times, and still in some places even now, fur was the primary armor against winter. Not the decorative furs worn by wealthy people in distant cities, chosen for their beauty and rarity, but the practical pelts of common animals, deer and elk and bear, rabbit and fox and beaver, each hide selected for the specific qualities it offered. Bear fur, when you could get it, was the ultimate prize, dense and oily and capable of shedding snow and rain, the guard hairs long enough to create a barrier of air, the underfur so thick that it felt like a separate creature nestled against the skin. But bears were dangerous to hunt and scarce in many regions, so more often it was deer that provided the bulk of winter clothing. Deerskin, properly prepared, is a marvel of material engineering, though you do not think of it in those terms. You think of it as good leather, as hide that has been worked until it transforms, the process both labor-intensive and alchemical. The deer must first be killed, which is its own ordeal, requiring patience and skill and often a measure of luck. Then comes the skinning, which must be done carefully to avoid puncturing the hide, the knife blade kept sharp and angled just so, separating skin from flesh in a motion that becomes smoother with practice but never entirely easy. The fresh hide is slippery and heavy, warm with the animal's residual heat, and it must be dealt with quickly before it begins to spoil. First it is fleshed, scraped clean of any remaining fat and tissue, a task that is messy and tedious and absolutely necessary. Then it must be either used immediately in a method called rawhide, or it must be tanned, preserved through a process that renders it soft and durable and resistant to decay. There are many ways to tan a hide, each requiring different materials and producing different results. You have used brain tanning, the most common method in your community, a technique that relies on the fact that every animal carries enough oils in its brain to tan its own hide, a piece of biological synchronicity that feels almost like providence. The brain is removed from the skull, mashed into a paste, mixed with water, and worked into the hide by hand, a process that takes hours of kneading and stretching, your arms aching, your back bent, the hide gradually absorbing the oils until it begins to soften. Afterward it must be smoked, hung over a fire of specific woods that impart not only color but water resistance, the smoke seeping into the fibers and sealing them against moisture. The finished product, when all is done correctly, is leather that can last for years, that moves with your body, that does not stiffen in the cold or crack in the dry air. You have garments made from such leather that are older than you are, passed down or traded, their surface burnished smooth by countless wearings, the original shape adjusted and recut to fit new bodies, patches sewn where holes appeared, but the fundamental material still sound, still functional, still holding warmth against the winter wind. Fur, though, is different from hide. Fur retains the hair, that insulating layer that the animal grew to protect itself, and in doing so it retains a greater capacity for warmth. But fur is also more delicate, the hair prone to shedding, the leather beneath requiring careful treatment to prevent it from drying out and losing flexibility. You have a cloak of fox pelts, stitched together in overlapping rows, the bushy tails left intact and hanging down your back. It is one of your most prized possessions, not because it is beautiful, though it is, in a wild, unself-conscious way, but because it is extraordinarily warm, the air trapped between the layers of fur creating an insulation that feels almost magical when the temperature plunges and the wind rises. The foxes were trapped over the course of several winters, each one a small victory, the traps checked every morning in the frigid pre-dawn darkness. Trapping is different from hunting. It requires foresight rather than immediate action, the ability to think like the animal, to predict its path and place the mechanism just so. You have learned to read tracks in snow, to distinguish the purposeful trot of a fox from the bounding gait of a rabbit, to know by the spacing and depth of prints whether an animal is young or old, healthy or struggling. This knowledge is not written down anywhere, it lives in your body and mind, acquired through observation and failure and eventual success. Each pelt, when retrieved from the trap, represents not just material but time and effort and the animal's life, a transaction that you do not take lightly. There is a respect in the handling, a care in the preparation, an acknowledgement that survival here is built on the deaths of other creatures. You have been taught to use everything, to waste nothing, a principle born not from sentiment but from necessity. The meat is eaten, the bones boiled for broth and then broken open for marrow, the sinew dried and used as thread, the pelt tanned and sewn into clothing. Nothing is discarded that can serve a purpose, because in this place, in this season, every resource is precious and none are guaranteed. You think of this as you move through the morning tasks, the light growing incrementally brighter though still filtered through cloud. You have work to do today, as you do every day, wood to split, water to haul from the spring before it freezes over entirely, a tear in your boot that needs mending before it widens and lets in snow. But first you pause, standing just outside the door of your dwelling, and you look out over the land. The trees are bare now, their branches black against the pale sky, though some still hold leaves that have turned brown and brittle but have not yet fallen, clinging stubbornly through wind and frost. The ground is white in patches where snow has collected, brown and gray in others where the earth shows through, the color leached out of everything, reduced to shades that speak of dormancy and waiting. The air is still, for the moment, but you know this will not last. By afternoon the wind will rise, funneling down from the high peaks you cannot see but know are there, and it will cut through any gap in your clothing, seeking warmth to steal. You pull the deerskin cloak tighter and feel the familiar comfort of its weight and texture. This cloak has kept you alive through winters that killed others, through nights when the cold was so intense that it hurt to breathe, when your exhaled breath froze instantly into ice crystals that hung in the air like tiny, suspended stars. You have slept in this cloak, curled around a fire that dwindled to coals while you dozed, waking in darkness to feed it again, the cloak holding just enough warmth to keep sleep from becoming something more permanent. In the dwelling behind you, others are beginning to stir, the sounds of morning routine filtering through the walls, the scrape of a pot, the murmur of voices, the cry of an infant who does not yet understand that noise draws cold. You will go back inside soon, join them in the work that sustains the household, but for now you remain outside, alone with the quiet and the cold and the layers that protect you from it. You think about the people who came before you, the ones who first learned to take the skins from animals and wear them, who first understood that wool could be turned into fabric, who first survived a winter and then another and then passed that knowledge forward. They did not have the luxury of experiment for its own sake. Every innovation was born from desperation, from the simple need to not die, to keep the body warm enough that the heart continued beating and the blood continued flowing, and another morning arrived. You are their inheritor, wearing the solutions they discovered, refined over generations into the forms you now take for granted. The stitches in your cloak follow patterns that are older than memory, thread paths that distribute stress and prevent tearing, hem treatments that keep edges from fraying. You did not invent these, you learned them, and you will teach them, and they will outlive you just as they outlived those who first devised them. In the far distance, you hear the sound of an axe biting wood, rhythmic and steady, someone else beginning their day's labor. The sound is comforting in its ordinariness, a reminder that you are not alone in this struggle, that survival here is a communal effort, each person's work contributing to the whole. You will see that person later, perhaps, and exchange a few words about the weather or the condition of the path to the spring, and those words will be brief and practical, but beneath them will run the current of shared understanding. We are here, we are enduring, we are still alive. You turn and go back inside, where the fire has been rebuilt and is beginning to throw real heat, where bread is being set to bake on the hearthstones, where the day's tasks are waiting. You remove the outer layers slowly, hanging the deerskin cloak on its peg, smoothing the fur vest before draping it over a bench, adjusting the wool tunic that remains against your skin. Each piece is treated with care, because each piece is essential, because to damage them through carelessness would be to weaken the only barrier between your body and the cold that waits outside, patient and indifferent and always, always present. The wool tunic, even alone, provides a measure of comfort, its fibers trapping air warmed by your skin, creating a microclimate that is yours alone. You have other garments like it, some in better repair, some nearly worn through, all of them made from wool that was once on the back of a sheep, that was sheared and cleaned and carded and spun and woven or knitted into fabric, each step a transformation, each transformation an act of survival. You have thought, on occasion, about what it would be like to live in a place where winter does not dominate so much of the year, where cold is an occasional visitor rather than a siege lasting months. You have heard that such places exist, though they seem as distant and abstract as the moon. Here, winter is the defining reality, the force around which everything else must arrange itself. The rest of the year is preparation for winter or recovery from it, the brief summer spent growing food and gathering materials, the autumn spent preserving and building and bracing for what is to come. And what is to come, always, is the cold. It is reliable in a way that little else is, a certainty that can be planned for, prepared against, but never entirely defeated. You can only make yourself ready, layer by layer, skin and fur and wool working together to create a shell that holds life inside it, that keeps the body's heat from escaping into the vast indifference of winter air. You move to the fire and hold your hands toward it, feeling the warmth penetrate your palms, travel up your wrists, spread through your arms. The fire is another kind of layer, another barrier against the cold, and it too requires constant attention, constant feeding, the wood that burns now having been gathered months ago and stacked to dry, each log selected and carried and stored against this moment. Nothing here is effortless, everything is the result of foresight and work and the accumulated knowledge of those who survived long enough to teach. Someone hands you a bowl of something hot, porridge perhaps, or thin soup, and you take it gratefully, wrapping your fingers around the warm ceramic, feeling the heat seep into your hands before you bring it to your lips and taste. The food is simple, plain, but it is fuel, another way of keeping the cold at bay, the body's internal fire fed by grain and fat and whatever else could be stored or preserved. You eat slowly, deliberately, aware of the gift that is warmth, that is food, that is shelter, that is the collection of materials and knowledge that allows you to sit here, inside, alive, while outside the world waits in its frozen patience. Later, when the day's work is done and evening settles in early as it does in winter, you will put the layers back on, one by one, preparing to step outside again for some final task, securing the animals, checking that everything is fastened against the night wind, looking up at the stars that will appear in the clear spaces between clouds, cold and distant and beautiful in their indifference. And the layers will do what they have always done, they will hold your warmth close, they will shield you from the wind, they will be the difference between enduring and succumbing. This is how wool and fur and skin became armor, not in a single moment of invention, not through the genius of one person, but through necessity and observation and the slow accumulation of understanding that each material offers something, that combined they offer more, that together they make survival possible in a world that does not care whether you live or die. You wear this armor now, as countless others have worn it before you, as others will wear it after you are gone, each person adding their small innovations, their repairs, their adaptations, the knowledge flowing forward like a river that has no source you can point to, only the fact of its presence, the fact that it has brought you here, to this moment, alive and warm enough to see another dawn. You wake before dawn in the stone house your family has occupied for 3 generations, and the first thing you feel is the weight of the sheepskin blanket pressed against your chin. The wool still carries faint traces of lanolin, that waxy substance the animal secreted in life, and it has kept the worst of the night's cold from settling into your bones. Outside, the wind moves through the valley with a low persistent voice, and you know without looking that frost has turned the grass to silver wire. You lie still for a moment, feeling the warmth you have created beneath the layered skins, reluctant to surrender it to the morning air. When you finally rise, you reach first for the tunic you laid across the wooden chest the night before. It is made from wool your mother carded and spun 2 winters ago, then woven by your sister on the loom that stands in the corner of the main room. The fabric is thick, almost felted in places where the fibers have compressed and locked together through use and the friction of your daily movements. You pull it over your head and feel its immediate insulation, the way it traps the thin layer of air warmed by your skin and holds it close. This is the fundamental principle that has kept your people alive through countless winters, the creation and preservation of warmth in the small space between body and world. Over the tunic you wrap a length of heavier cloth, also wool, that serves as both cloak and blanket depending on need. It fastens at your shoulder with a bronze pin your grandfather made, the metal cold against your fingertips as you work the clasp. You slip your feet into boots lined with rabbit fur, the softness of it strange and comforting against your soles, and you step out into the blue hour before sunrise when everything exists in shades of gray and silver. The village is stirring slowly, smoke beginning to rise from other roofs, and you make your way toward the animal shelters where the work of winter survival continues in its endless cycle. The sheep are huddled together in their pen, their breath rising in small clouds, and you pause to watch them, marveling as you always do at the way their bodies have solved the same problem yours struggles with each day. Their fleece grows continuously, a living insulation that renews itself, and you think about the generations of observation and experimentation that taught your ancestors how to claim that protection for themselves. You remember the stories the elders tell in the long evenings, how in the time before memory, people first learned to take the skins of animals and wrap themselves in borrowed warmth. It was not a simple theft, not a thoughtless act of dominance, but a careful study of how other creatures endured what human flesh alone could not. The great prey animals, deer and elk, wild cattle and boar, carried their defense against cold on their very bodies, and when hunger and necessity drove your distant ancestors to hunt them, they found themselves with not only meat to sustain life but also hide that could extend it through the frozen months. Those early people, you imagine, must have first used the skins fresh and raw, scraping away the fat and flesh as best they could with stone tools, then draping the still damp leather over their shoulders. It would have been stiff and uncomfortable, prone to rot, but it would have been better than bare skin against the wind. And then, through seasons of trial and failure, they learned the processes that would transform a dead animal's covering into something lasting, something that could serve year after year if properly maintained. You have learned these processes yourself, taught by your father and the other skilled workers in your community, and you carry the knowledge in your hands and memory. The tanning of hides is a patient art, requiring days or weeks depending on the size of the skin and the method employed. You remember crouching beside the wooden frame where a deerskin was stretched, watching your father work a mixture of the animal's own brain tissue into the leather, explaining how the fats and oils would soften the fibers and make them supple. The brain, he told you, contains exactly the right amount of substance to tan its own hide, as if the animal carried within itself the formula for its transformation. There are other methods too, each suited to different needs and materials. Some hides are smoked over carefully tended fires, the compounds in the smoke bonding with the leather to make it water-resistant and durable. Others are treated with tannins extracted from oak bark, soaked in great vats for months until the astringent compounds have penetrated every layer and turned the hide a deep rich brown. You have worked with all these techniques, learning to read the texture and smell of the leather, knowing when it needs more oil or more stretching, understanding through repetition and attention what each skin requires. But it is wool that has truly changed the conditions of winter survival for your people, and as you stand watching the sheep in their morning stillness, you consider what a revolution this must have been when it first occurred. Unlike fur, which must be taken from a dead animal, wool can be harvested from a living one, sheared away in spring and allowed to grow back through summer and fall. This renewable resource means your family need not kill to stay warm, that the same sheep can provide year after year, generation after generation, creating a relationship of mutual dependence rather than simple predation. The sheep themselves were not always so generous with their fleece. You have heard the old stories, passed down from travelers who came from distant lands, of the original wild ancestors of these domestic animals, creatures with coarse outer hair and only a thin undercoat of fine wool. It took generations of careful selection, people choosing to breed those animals with thicker, softer wool, to create the sheep that now stand before you with their heavy winter coats. This was a slow collaboration between human intention and animal biology, a patient negotiation carried out over centuries until the two species became bound together in survival. You enter the pen and move among the animals, running your hand along their backs, feeling the depth and density of their fleece. In a few weeks, when the worst of winter has passed but before the spring rains begin, the shearing will start. It is communal work, all the families gathering to help each other, and you can already imagine the sound of the metal blades clicking in rhythm, the piles of wool growing in the corners of the barn, the sheep looking suddenly smaller and vulnerable without their coats. But by then the sun will have real warmth in it, and the animals will be comfortable enough in their bare skin while their covering becomes yours. For now, you scatter feed and check their water, breaking the thin ice that has formed overnight in the wooden trough, and the routine of care steadies you as it always does. The work of staying alive in winter is not dramatic or heroic. It is this daily attention to small necessities, the feeding and watering and sheltering that must happen regardless of weather or mood. The animals depend on you as you depend on them, a circle of obligation and benefit that predates any memory. When the sheep are tended, you make your way to the workshop where the next stage of wool's transformation takes place. Here your mother and sister are already working, their hands moving with practiced efficiency through tasks they have performed thousands of times. Your mother sits beside the fire, a pair of wooden paddles in her hands, the surfaces studded with dried teasel heads that catch and align the wool fibers. She is carding a pile of fleece that was washed and dried weeks ago, pulling it between the paddles until it forms into soft, airy clouds that seem to hold light within them. Your sister works at the spinning wheel, her foot maintaining a steady rhythm on the treadle while her fingers guide the carded wool onto the spindle. The transformation is almost magical to watch, loose, formless fiber becoming yarn, the twist of the wheel binding the individual strands into something with tensile strength and continuity. She can spin without looking, her hands reading the texture of the wool by touch alone, knowing exactly how much to draw out, how fast to let the twist travel up the forming thread. You take your place beside them, pulling out the drop spindle you carved last autumn from a smooth branch and a whirl of clay. This older method is slower than the wheel but just as effective, and there is something meditative about the repetition, the twist and drop, the draw and wind, the gradual accumulation of yarn around the spindle shaft. Your hands remember the motion without conscious thought, and you settle into the rhythm of it while morning light strengthens beyond the windows. The three of you work in comfortable silence, the only sounds the whisper of fiber against fiber, the soft clack of the spinning wheel, the occasional pop and settle of the fire. This is how communities survive, you think, through the patient accumulation of small acts, the transformation of raw materials into useful goods, the investment of time and skill into objects that will preserve life through the dangerous seasons. Every thread you spin will become part of a larger fabric, woven into clothing or blankets, traded for other necessities, passed down to children not yet born. You think about the full chain of labor that connects the grass in summer fields to the warmth around your shoulders in winter, the shepherding and feeding, the shearing and washing, the carding and spinning, the dyeing and weaving, the cutting and sewing. At each stage, knowledge is required, knowledge about animal behavior, plant chemistry, tool use, material properties, all of it accumulated over generations and transmitted through demonstration and practice. No one person holds all this knowledge. It is distributed through the community, each member contributing their particular skills to the collective work of survival. By mid-morning, you have spun enough yarn to fill one large skein, and you set it aside to help your sister at the loom. The weaving is perhaps the most complex stage, requiring the weaver to maintain dozens of parallel threads in perfect tension while interlacing the weft yarn over and under in precise patterns. Your sister has been working on this particular piece for weeks, a heavy twill fabric that will become a winter cloak for your younger brother. The pattern creates diagonal ridges that trap air more effectively than a plain weave would, adding extra insulation without additional weight. You watch as her fingers move through the shed, the shuttle sliding smoothly from side to side, the beater pressing each new row firmly against the previous one. The fabric grows with agonizing slowness, a finger's width in an hour, but the result is dense and windproof, worth every minute of careful work. You remember learning to weave yourself, the frustration of broken threads and uneven tension, the gradual development of touch and timing that allows the process to flow. It took months before your hands understood what your eyes could see, before the rhythm became natural enough to sustain for hours without pain or error. Outside, the winter sun has climbed to its low apex, casting long shadows across the snow that fell during the night. The light has a thin quality, bright but without warmth, and you are grateful for the walls around you, the fire on the hearth, the wool clothing that forms a portable shelter around your body. You think about people in warmer lands who never developed these technologies, who never needed to learn the transformation of fiber into fabric because their climates allowed lighter forms of dress. Their histories unfolded differently, their ingenuity applied to other problems, their relationship with animals taking other forms. But here in this northern place, where winter brings genuine danger to the unprepared, the mastery of wool and fur and leather became a survival requirement, as essential as knowing which plants were edible or how to build a fire. Your ancestors had no choice but to become experts in animal biology and material science, to understand through observation and experiment how different fibers behaved, what treatments made them stronger or softer or more resistant to water. This knowledge was not recorded in written form. Most of your people cannot read or write, but it lives in the hands and memories of every person who works with these materials, embedded in the community itself like a collective inheritance. When the midday meal is prepared, the family gathers around the long table, and you eat stew thick with root vegetables and barley, sopping up the broth with dark bread. The food is simple but sufficient, providing the fuel your body needs to generate the heat that your clothing then preserves. You think about this relationship too, how warmth is not just trapped from outside but created within, how the calories you consume are literally burning inside you at this moment, their energy released as the heat that keeps blood flowing and muscles working. After the meal, your father asks for your help with a task he has been postponing. One of the old storage chests has deteriorated, its leather hinges finally giving way after decades of use, and he wants to replace them before the chest becomes unusable. You follow him to the small side room where he keeps his tools and materials, the space smelling of oil and tanned hide and metal. He has already selected the leather for the new hinges, thick cowhide that was tanned with oak bark until it became almost as hard as wood. You watch as he measures and cuts, his knife moving through the tough material with surprising ease, the blade kept sharp through constant attention. Leather this thick requires real strength to work, and you can see the muscles in his forearms flexing as he makes each cut. When the pieces are shaped, he punches holes for the rivets, then softens the leather over steam so it can be bent without cracking. The process is methodical and precise, each step building on the previous one, and you understand that you are not just learning to repair a chest but inheriting a broader understanding of how materials behave and how tools extend the capabilities of human hands. As he works, your father talks about his own father, who was known throughout the region as a master leatherworker, capable of making saddles and harnesses that would last 20 years of hard use. The old man died before you were born, but his tools remain, each one shaped by his hands and bearing the marks of his particular techniques. Your father uses them still, and when he passes them to you someday, they will carry 3 generations of skill and care. You run your finger along the smooth wooden handle of a cutting knife, feeling the groove worn by years of gripping, and you understand that you are part of a continuity that extends both backward and forward beyond your individual life. When the hinges are attached and the chest is functional again, your father nods with satisfaction and returns the tools to their places. Everything has a specific location in this room, arranged for efficiency and care, and you help him tidy the scraps of leather that can be saved for smaller projects. Nothing is wasted, even the smallest pieces will become patches or laces or decorative elements. This ethic of use and reuse, of respecting the materials that came from living creatures, pervades every aspect of your community's relationship with animal products. The afternoon draws toward evening, and you return to your own work, preparing a rabbit hide that you have been processing for the past week. The rabbit was caught in one of the traps you maintain at the edge of the forest, and after eating the meat, you carefully removed the skin and began the process of transforming it into something useful. Rabbit fur is among the softest and warmest, the individual hairs fine and dense, and it is particularly valued for lining hoods and cuffs where it will touch exposed skin. The hide has been scraped clean of fat and membrane, then rubbed with a mixture of egg yolk and oil that your mother prepared. Now it needs to be worked, stretched and flexed repeatedly, to break down the fibers and make them supple. You pull the skin back and forth across a smooth post, feeling the resistance gradually decrease as the leather softens. It is monotonous work, requiring sustained effort but little concentration, and your mind drifts as your hands continue their motion. You think about the animals themselves, the creatures whose bodies have provided so much for human survival. In your culture, There is a deep respect for them, expressed through rituals of gratitude and careful use of every part. When a deer is killed, prayers are offered to its spirit, thanking it for its sacrifice and asking forgiveness for the necessity of its death. The meat is distributed throughout the community, the hide is tanned with care, the bones are made into tools, the sinew becomes thread, even the hooves are boiled down for glue. Nothing is treated as mere waste because everything came from a life that deserves acknowledgement. This relationship is complicated, you know, marked by both dependence and violence, gratitude and exploitation. You cannot live without taking from other creatures, but you can choose to take thoughtfully, to minimize suffering where possible, to honor the lives that sustain yours. The sheep and goats and cattle that your family tends are not pets, but neither are they simply resources. They are living beings with their own forms of awareness and preference, and good animal husbandry requires attention to their needs and comfort. A stressed or unhealthy animal produces inferior wool and leather, so even from a purely practical standpoint, care and respect serve human interests. But it goes deeper than pragmatism, you think. There is something fundamental about the recognition that you are part of a larger web of life, that your warmth in winter comes directly from the bodies of other creatures, that you are bound to them through networks of necessity and benefit. This awareness shapes how you move through the world, attentive to the lives around you, conscious of your impacts and obligations. By the time you finish working the rabbit hide, it has become soft and pliable, ready to be cut and sewn into a lining for the mittens your sister is making. You fold it carefully and set it aside, washing your hands in the basin by the door. The water is cold, drawn from the well just before it could freeze, and it shocks your skin into alertness. You dry your hands on a wool cloth, feeling once again that familiar texture, and you are grateful for it in a way that goes beyond words. Evening settles over the village, the early winter darkness arriving before the day feels finished. Families retreat into their homes, closing shutters and doors against the cold, building up fires and lighting oil lamps. Your own family gathers in the main room, and after the evening meal is cleared, your mother brings out her current sewing project. She is making a coat for your father, lined with sheepskin and faced with leather at the shoulders and elbows where wear is heaviest. The construction requires dozens of careful seams, each one stitched with thread made from sinew that was prepared last spring. You watch her work, the needle moving in and out with practiced rhythm, the stitches small and even. She taught you to sew when you were barely old enough to hold a needle, starting with simple repairs and gradually progressing to more complex construction. Now you can make your own clothing from raw materials, can repair tears and replace worn sections, can modify garments to fit better or serve new purposes. This self-sufficiency is not a luxury but a necessity in a world where there are no shops to purchase ready-made goods, where everything you own must be created or obtained through direct trade. Your younger brother asks your father to tell a story, and the old man settles back in his chair, thinking for a moment before he begins. He chooses a tale you have heard many times before but never tire of, a story about the first people to venture into the far north, following the great herds of reindeer into lands where winter lasted most of the year. These ancient travelers, he says, learned to dress entirely in animal skins, from their boots to their hooded parkas, and they developed techniques for sewing that made their clothing completely windproof. The secret, he explains, was in using strips of sinew thread and making the stitches so tight and close together that no air could pass between them. The people also discovered that 2 layers of fur, worn with the hair facing both inward and outward, created a space of trapped air that insulated better than any single layer could. They lined their boots with dried grass that could be changed daily, keeping their feet dry and warm even when walking through deep snow. They made waterproof outer garments from seal intestines, thin and translucent but capable of shedding rain and spray. These northernmost people, your father continues, became so skilled at survival in extreme cold that they could live comfortably in places that would kill others within hours. Their entire material culture was built around the principle of insulation and protection, every tool and garment designed to preserve the fragile warmth of human life in the most hostile environment on Earth. They studied the animals of their region, seals and walruses, polar bears and Arctic foxes, and learned from each one some technique of cold adaptation that could be translated into human terms. You listen to the story with the part of your mind that loves the rhythm and repetition of familiar tales, but you are also thinking about the broader implications of what your father describes. Human beings are not naturally adapted to cold climates. Your bodies evolved in warmer regions and lack the thick fur or insulating fat layers of true Arctic animals. And yet through observation and innovation, through the patient development of technology and technique, humans have managed to inhabit nearly every climate on Earth, from equatorial rainforests to polar ice sheets. This adaptability is perhaps the defining characteristic of your species, you think. Where other animals are constrained by their biology to specific environments, humans have used their capacity for learning and tool-making to overcome those constraints. The same creativity that discovered fire and developed language also learned to transform wool and fur and leather into portable shelters, extending the reach of human habitation far beyond what flesh alone could survive. But this adaptability comes with responsibility, you believe. The power to reshape materials and environments for human benefit must be balanced with awareness of consequences and costs. The animals whose bodies warm you are not infinite resources. They must be managed sustainably, their populations maintained, their needs considered alongside your own. The land that supports those animals must be cared for, the water and grass and shelter that sustain them protected from degradation. Your community understands this intuitively, through generations of experience in this particular place. You know how many sheep and goats the valley can support without overgrazing, how many deer can be hunted each season without depleting the population, which areas must be left undisturbed to allow regeneration. This knowledge is not written in books but encoded in practices and prohibitions, in the shared wisdom that governs community decisions about resource use. The story ends, and your brother is already drowsing by the fire, his head nodding forward. Your mother sets aside her sewing and rises to bank the coals for the night, covering them with ash so they will stay alive until morning without consuming too much fuel. Your father checks the shutters one more time, making sure they are firmly closed, and you all prepare for sleep. In your sleeping alcove, you remove your outer layers but keep the wool underlayers on, adding the sheepskin blanket and a heavy woven coverlet on top. The bed is built into the wall, enclosed on 3 sides to contain warmth, and there is fresh straw in the mattress ticking that still smells faintly of summer meadows. You settle into the familiar comfort of it, feeling your body relax into the support, the day's work evident in the pleasant ache of used muscles. Before sleep takes you, you think once more about the invisible network of relationships that surrounds and sustains you, the sheep in their shelter, the wool on your body, the leather hinges on the repaired chest, the rabbit fur waiting to become mitten linings, the stories that carry knowledge forward through time. You are held in a web of dependencies and reciprocities, bound to other lives and to the accumulated wisdom of those who came before you. Your survival through winter is not an individual achievement but a collective one, made possible by community and continuity, by the patient development of technologies that harness the protective qualities of animal materials without forgetting that they came from living creatures who also sought warmth and safety in a challenging world. The wind rises again outside, moving around the corners of the house with its ancient voice, but you are protected from it by stone and wood and wool, by the insulation your ancestors learned to claim and your own hands learned to create. The cold remains, indifferent and powerful, but you have learned to make spaces of warmth within it, small victories of human ingenuity and care that allow life to persist through the most difficult seasons. You close your eyes and let sleep approach, knowing that tomorrow will bring more of the same necessary work, the feeding and tending and transforming that fills your days. It is not a dramatic life by some measures, but it is purposeful and interconnected, woven into the rhythms of season and animal and material. You are part of something larger than yourself, a human community nested within a community of other lives, all of you negotiating the terms of survival in this particular place, all of you seeking warmth and shelter and the continuation of your kind. The last thought you have before consciousness fades is of spring, still months away, when the sheep will be shorn and new wool will pile in the corners of the barn, when the cycle will begin again as it has for generations uncounted. There is comfort in that continuity, in knowing that the same patterns will repeat, that the knowledge preserved in your hands and memory will be passed forward to others, that the ancient partnership between human and animal will endure as long as both remain attentive to their mutual needs. And then you sleep, wrapped in the wool and fur and leather that carry you safely through another night of winter, your dreams populated by sheep on hillsides and needles moving through fabric and the patient rhythm of spinning wheels, all the small miracles of transformation that make human life possible in this cold land at the edge of the world. You stand at the threshold of deep winter now, where survival becomes less a matter of chance and more a testament to accumulated wisdom. The air around you carries that particular quality of cold that seems almost sentient, searching for any gap in your defenses, any weakness in the barrier between your warmth and the world's indifference. You have learned, over these long months of watching and working, that winter clothing is not merely worn, it is negotiated with, maintained, respected as you would respect any ally upon whom your life depends. The garments you have constructed hang near the fire, absorbing what little heat the embers can spare, and you understand now that they are never truly finished, never complete, but exist in a constant state of becoming, of repair, of adaptation to the particular demands of each day's weather and each night's descent into cold that feels absolute. The settlement around you has taken on the aspect of a creature hunched against the elements, every dwelling pulled tight into itself, every opening sealed with whatever materials ingenuity and necessity have provided. Smoke rises from roof holes in thin, determined columns that the wind bends but cannot extinguish, and in these signs of controlled fire you read the presence of other lives, other struggles that mirror your own. The stores of food have diminished to the point where each meal is calculated not for satisfaction but for continuation, for the maintenance of body heat and the strength to perform the essential tasks that winter still demands. You move through your days wrapped in the results of autumn's labor, the coat of stitched hides that has become like a second skin, the boots lined with rabbit fur that allow your feet to retain feeling even when you stand in snow that reaches your shins, the mittens of felted wool that let you handle tools and gather wood without the immediate agony of frozen fingers. There is a family 3 dwellings from yours, and you have watched them through the season with the particular attention that winter enforces, because in this weather the fate of one household becomes a concern for all. They have 4 children, the youngest still nursing, and you have seen the mother emerge each morning to break ice in the water vessel they keep outside, her movements quick and practiced, her body wrapped in a cloak that you recognize as sewn from the pelts of foxes, the white fur tipped with black at the tail ends creating a pattern that seems almost decorative until you remember that decoration is not the point, that every stitch and every pelt represents hours of work and the successful hunt that preceded it. The father works with wood, shaping handles for tools and constructing the frames for snowshoes that have become essential for moving through the deep drifts that have transformed the landscape into something barely recognizable from its autumn form. You have traded with them, your skill in preparing leather for their skill in woodcraft, and in these exchanges you have come to understand the intricate web of interdependence that winter weaves around a community. No one possesses all the skills necessary for complete survival. No single household holds all the materials required to outfit its members adequately against the cold. The woman who can felt wool trades with the man who can cure hides. The hunter who brings down deer shares meat in exchange for the tanning knowledge that will transform hide into usable material. The elder who remembers how to construct a particular type of boot that keeps feet dry in wet snow shares this knowledge freely, understanding that the death of anyone from cold or exposure diminishes the community's chance of persisting through to spring. On a morning when the cold is particularly fierce, when your breath crystallizes instantly upon leaving your mouth and the interior walls of your dwelling are rimed with frost despite the fire that you have kept burning through the night, you hear a sound that does not belong to the ordinary vocabulary of winter, a cry of distress, human and urgent, cutting through the muffled silence that deep snow imposes on the world. You move to the door, pulling your coat tighter, adjusting the fur-lined hood that protects your ears and the back of your neck, and emerge into air that feels sharp enough to cut. The sound comes again, and you recognize it now as coming from the direction of the dwelling where a widow lives alone, a woman whose husband died in early autumn from a fever that all the community's knowledge of herbs and healing could not break. You move toward the sound, your boots crunching through the top crust of snow into the softer layer beneath, each step requiring effort that would be exhausting if maintained for any distance. Other figures emerge from other dwellings, similarly wrapped and hooded, moving toward the same source. You arrive to find that the widow's door has blown open, or more accurately, the hide that serves as her door has torn free from its fastenings on one side, and the interior of her dwelling is visible, the fire reduced to embers that give almost no heat, the woman herself huddled in the corner wrapped in blankets that you can see, even from here, are inadequate for this degree of cold. There is no discussion needed, no debate about what must be done. Two of the men set about rehanging the door covering, using strips of leather they have brought from their own supplies to create new fastening points. A woman enters the dwelling and begins coaxing the fire back to life, feeding it carefully with kindling and then larger pieces of wood, her movements patient because rushing a fire in these conditions can extinguish it entirely. You find yourself kneeling beside the widow, assessing her condition not with words but with observation, the color of her lips, the coherence of her gaze, the steadiness of her hands when she reaches toward the reviving fire. She is cold but not dangerously so, not yet, because the night just passed, though bitter, was not the coldest of the season, and her dwelling, however compromised by the broken door, retained enough heat to keep her from the edge of freezing. Still, you can see that her clothing is insufficient, that the blankets she possesses are worn thin with use and age. Someone brings tea brewed from herbs that warm from within, and the widow drinks it gratefully, her hands steadied by those of the woman who tends the fire. You look at the others gathered in this small space, all of you understanding without speaking that a decision must be made, that the community's resources must be redistributed in some fashion to ensure that this dwelling, this life, makes it through to spring. What happens next is a kind of accounting that involves no counting, a sharing that acknowledges both need and limitation. One family contributes a hide that has been tanned but not yet fashioned into anything specific, offering it with the understanding that it will be made into an additional layer of insulation either for wearing or for covering the walls of the dwelling. Another brings wool that has been cleaned and carded but not yet spun, enough to create several pairs of thick socks or a simple vest that can be worn under outer garments for added warmth. You find yourself offering a pair of rabbit fur mittens that you had set aside as a reserve, understanding that your own situation is more secure than this woman's, that your stores of food and fuel will likely see you through to the thaw, and that the security of one is, in this context, meaningless if it comes at the cost of another's survival. The widow accepts these offerings with a dignity that refuses to be diminished by need, and you understand that she, too, is making calculations, determining what she might offer in return when the season changes and her particular skills. She is known as someone who understands the plants that grow in the forest, who can identify which roots remain edible when dug from frozen ground, who knows which barks can be brewed into medicines, become valuable again. This is not charity in the sense of one-directional giving, but rather an acknowledgement that survival has seasons, that the person who is vulnerable in winter may be the source of another's survival in spring or summer, and that memory persists through the cold, creating obligations and alliances that structure the community as surely as kinship ties or formal agreements. As the dwelling warms and the door is secured more firmly than before, you return to your own space, but the morning's events have shifted something in your understanding. You have known, intellectually, that winter survival depends on more than individual preparation, but experiencing the immediate mobilization of the community in response to crisis has made this knowledge visceral. You look at your own stores of clothing and materials with new eyes, understanding that what you possess is not solely yours, that it exists within a network of potential obligations and possible futures where what is yours today may need to become another's tomorrow. The days that follow settle back into the rhythm of deep winter maintenance, checking trap lines that you have set for small game, gathering wood from the supply you stacked before the first snow, rationing food to ensure that what remains will last until hunting becomes viable again. The clothing you wear requires constant attention. The stitches in your coat need periodic inspection because cold makes sinew brittle and movement stresses seams. You discover a small tear where the hide has worn thin at the shoulder, precisely where you carry wood, and you understand that this is not a failure of construction but simply the reality of use, that materials worked hard will show that work in their fibers and surfaces. You sit near the fire one evening, needle in hand, working to repair this tear with a patch cut from a piece of hide you have reserved for such purposes. The work requires removing your mittens, and your fingers grow cold quickly despite the fire's warmth, so you work in intervals, several stitches, then a pause to warm your hands, then several more stitches. The needle is made from bone, thin and sharp, carefully shaped from the leg bone of a deer, and threading it with sinew requires patience and steady hands. You have learned to prepare sinew by splitting it into fine threads that are strong but flexible, and you have learned that wetting sinew slightly before threading makes it more pliable, easier to work with, though you must be careful not to wet it too much or it will become weak and prone to breaking. As you work, you think about the origins of this knowledge, about how someone discovered that sinew could be used as thread, that bone could be shaped into needles, that hides could be softened and made pliable through the labor-intensive process of scraping and stretching and treating with solutions made from brains or liver. These discoveries feel almost miraculous in their ingenuity, and yet you know they arose not from sudden insight but from the accumulated experimentation of countless people over periods of time too long to imagine, each small improvement preserved and passed down because it increased the chance of survival, of persisting through another winter, of seeing another spring. The repair takes longer than you expected, because good work cannot be rushed, and you want this patch to hold not just for the remainder of this season but for the next, and the one after that if the hide itself remains serviceable. When you finish, you hold the coat up to examine the seam, testing its strength by pulling gently at the edges of the patch, satisfied when it holds firm. You slip the coat back on and feel immediately the restoration of its integrity, the way it sits correctly on your shoulders again, the way the patch adds a slight extra thickness that will actually increase the garment's overall warmth. Word spreads through the settlement that a hunter has managed to bring down a winter elk, a rare and valuable kill because elk in winter carry less fat than in autumn but still provide substantial meat and a hide large enough to serve multiple purposes. The community gathers not at the kill site. The cold makes it possible to leave the carcass where it fell until it can be properly processed, but at the hunter's dwelling to acknowledge the kill and discuss distribution. You join the others, moving through snow that the day's weak sunlight has crusted over, making each step crunch distinctly in the still air. The gathering is brief because no one wants to remain outside longer than necessary, but the decisions made here will affect every household for weeks to come. The meat will be divided according to need and contribution, with larger shares going to families with more children, smaller shares to those living alone, but everyone receiving some portion because a kill this significant is understood to belong to the community rather than solely to the hunter. The hide, being particularly large and of good quality despite the season, will go to a family that lost most of their winter supplies when a storage pit flooded during an early thaw and then froze solid, destroying the furs and dried foods they had cached there. You receive a portion of meat that, carefully rationed, will add protein to your meals for perhaps 2 weeks, and you accept it with the same quiet acknowledgement that others use, understanding that this too is part of the web of obligation and support that winter demands. The hunter himself seems almost embarrassed by the attention, deflecting praise with mentions of luck and favorable conditions, but you can see in his careful maintenance of his weapons, in the quality of his winter clothing, in the patient skill with which he tracks game even when conditions make it nearly impossible, that luck is only a small component of success, that the larger part is preparation and persistence and knowledge accumulated across a lifetime of winters. As you return to your dwelling, meat wrapped in a piece of hide and tucked inside your coat where your body heat will keep it from freezing solid, you notice that the light is changing in a way that suggests the sun, though still low and weak, is beginning its slow arc back toward the north. The change is barely perceptible, a matter of the angle of shadows and the precise moment when darkness falls, but you have learned to read these subtle shifts, to understand that winter, however absolute it feels in its depths, is not eternal, that it contains within itself the seeds of its own ending. This knowledge does not make the cold less cold or the darkness less dark, but it provides a framework for endurance, a reminder that what you are experiencing, however difficult, is part of a larger cycle that will complete itself. The clothing that protects you, that keeps the cold at bay and allows you to move through the landscape without immediately succumbing to exposure, is both a product of this cycle and a tool for surviving it. The animals whose skins you wear lived through their own versions of this season, grew their winter coats in response to shortening days and falling temperatures, and in taking those coats for your own use, you are not stealing but rather participating in an exchange that is older than memory, older than any individual tradition, extending back to the first humans who understood that survival required borrowing the adaptations that other creatures had evolved across eons. You spend an afternoon working with a small piece of wolf fur that you obtained in a trade several months ago, before the deep cold set in. Wolf fur is particularly valued because it resists frost buildup from breath, making it ideal for trimming the edge of a hood where warm exhalation meets cold air and would otherwise create ice that accumulates and becomes problematic. You are adding this fur to your hood, stitching it carefully to the edge where it will frame your face and provide additional protection for your cheeks and nose. The work is meticulous, each stitch placed close to the next to ensure that the fur is securely attached and that no gaps exist where cold can penetrate. Your fingers remember the motion of sewing even as they grow stiff with cold, and you find yourself falling into a meditative rhythm where thought and action merge, where the physical work of placing each stitch becomes a form of moving meditation that quiets the restless anxiety that winter can produce when you remain too much in your own head, too aware of the weeks that still stretch between now and the time when the ice will break in the rivers and green will return to the world. As you work, you think about the wolf that once wore this fur. Imagine it moving through winter forests, hunting in the snow, its coat keeping it warm even in temperatures that would kill an unprotected human within hours. There is something humbling about this, about the recognition that you survive not through your own innate adaptations but through your ability to borrow the adaptations of others, to take what evolution has crafted across millions of years and repurpose it for your own needs. You did not grow this fur yourself, cannot grow it, and yet it serves you as well as it served its original owner, perhaps better, because you combine it with other materials, layering and stitching and constructing assemblages of protection that are more versatile than any single animal's coat. When the work is finished and you try on the hood with its new wolf fur trim, you feel immediately the difference it makes, the way the fur captures and holds warm air near your face, the way it blocks wind that would otherwise strike your exposed skin. You step outside to test it in actual conditions, and the cold that has been a constant assault for weeks feels suddenly more manageable, less like an enemy and more like a condition to be navigated, worked with, understood on its own terms. The night that follows is one of the coldest of the season, cold enough that the trees in the forest make cracking sounds as their sap freezes and expands, sounds that carry through the still air like distant thunder. You lie in your sleeping furs, layered deep enough that only your face is exposed, and you listen to these sounds, to the settling of your dwelling's walls as they contract in the cold, to the pop and hiss of the fire that you have banked carefully for the night. Sleep comes slowly because cold of this intensity makes the body reluctant to fully relax, keep some part of the mind alert for danger, for the possibility that the fire will die or the dwelling's insulation will prove inadequate. But you do sleep, eventually, and when you wake the fire is still burning low, and the cold has not penetrated to the point of danger, and you understand that all your preparations, all the work of gathering and sewing and constructing layers of protection, have done exactly what they were meant to do. They have kept you alive through a night that might otherwise have killed you, and there is no drama in this, no moment of crisis or triumph, just the simple fact of waking in a world that is still winter, still cold, still demanding, but that you have proven capable of meeting on terms that allow for survival. The morning routine unfolds with the careful precision that cold weather enforces. You build up the fire slowly, adding small pieces of wood to the embers and blowing gently to encourage flames without smothering them with too much fuel too quickly. You melt snow for water, heating it in a clay vessel near the fire until it steams. You eat a small meal of dried meat and parched grain that requires little preparation but provides the calories necessary to maintain body heat and energy. You dress in layers, each garment serving its specific purpose, each contributing to the overall system of warmth that will allow you to move through the day without constantly fighting the cold. Outside, the world is transformed by the previous night's extreme cold. Every surface is coated with frost that glitters in the morning light, and the smoke from dwelling fires rises absolutely straight into air so still that it seems frozen in place. You can hear others moving about the settlement, the sound of wood being split, of voices calling back and forth, of dogs barking with the particular urgency that cold weather produces in animals who, like humans, must work harder simply to maintain their basic temperature. You have tasks that must be completed regardless of the cold, checking on stored food supplies, gathering wood from your stack to replenish what you burned through the night, tending to small repairs that, if left unaddressed, will become larger problems. But you move through these tasks with a different awareness now, a recognition that you are not simply surviving winter but participating in something larger, something that connects you backward to all the humans who have ever faced this season and forward to all those who will continue to face it, all of you linked by the fundamental challenge of maintaining life in conditions that are indifferent to whether you persist or perish. There is a particular quality to winter light that you have come to appreciate, a clarity that results from air so cold that moisture freezes out of it, leaving a transparency that makes distant objects seem closer, that renders every detail sharp and defined. In this light, you can see the individual dwellings of the settlement, can observe the smoke from each fire, can assess which homes are burning fuel efficiently and which are using too much, which families are managing well and which might be struggling. This is not nosiness but survival awareness, the understanding that in winter everyone's fate is connected, that a family in trouble becomes everyone's concern because their collapse can affect resource distribution, can create emergency situations that draw on the community's limited reserves. You notice that one dwelling, belonging to a family with 3 young children, is producing very little smoke, suggesting that their fire is burning low, that they might be running short of fuel or struggling to keep wood dry enough to burn efficiently. You make a mental note to stop by later, not to intrude or judge, but to offer assistance if needed, to share from your own woodpile if theirs has run low, because you remember the morning when the widow's door tore loose, remember how the community responded without hesitation, and you understand that your current relative security is not guaranteed, that circumstances could change quickly, that the help you offer today might be the model for help you receive tomorrow. The afternoon brings a shift in the weather, a slight moderation in temperature that, while still far below freezing, feels almost warm after the extreme cold of the night. You use this relative warmth to work outside, checking the condition of hides you have stretched on frames and left to cure in the cold, examining them for any signs of deterioration or incomplete processing. The cold itself acts as a preservative, preventing the bacterial growth that would otherwise cause hides to rot, and you have learned to use winter as a workshop, a time when certain tasks that would be difficult or impossible in warmer weather become feasible. One of the hides shows signs of incomplete scraping on one edge, where a patch of membrane still clings to the inner surface. You take up your scraping tool, a piece of bone shaped and sharpened for this specific purpose, and work to remove the remaining membrane, your movements careful because too much force can create holes or thin spots that will weaken the final product. The work warms you despite the cold, your body generating heat through effort, and you appreciate this warmth even as you remain aware that you must not overheat, must not sweat, because moisture inside your clothing in these temperatures can quickly become dangerous, chilling you more effectively than dry cold. As you work, you find yourself thinking about the hunter who brought down the winter elk, about the moment when tracking and patience and skill converge to create the opportunity for a successful kill. You imagine him moving through the forest, reading signs in the snow, tracks, droppings, browsing patterns, building a mental map of the animal's movements and preferences, positioning himself not where the elk was but where it would be, understanding that hunting is not about pursuit but about prediction, about knowing the patterns that govern animal behavior and placing yourself in the space where those patterns will unfold. This kind of knowledge cannot be learned from instruction alone, it requires experience, requires spending time in the forest across all seasons, in all weathers, observing and remembering and slowly building an internal library of information that becomes intuition. The hunter knows which trees elk prefer to browse in winter, knows how deep snow affects their movement patterns, knows the signs that indicate a healthy animal versus one weakened by hunger or disease. This knowledge keeps the community fed, turns the forest from a dangerous unknown into a landscape that can be read and understood and, to a limited extent, predicted. Your own knowledge is different but equally essential. You can look at a hide and assess its quality, can determine whether it came from an animal in good health or one that was stressed or diseased, can predict how it will perform once processed and made into clothing or shelter material. You know which areas of a hide are strongest and most durable, which are more supple and better suited for garments that require flexibility. You know how to adjust your processing techniques based on what purpose the hide will ultimately serve. Know that a hide intended for a winter coat requires different treatment than one intended for summer moccasins. This knowledge, too, has been accumulated across generations, passed down from those who learned through experimentation and mistake, through the costly lessons of garments that failed in critical moments, through the observations of what worked and what did not. You are the current holder of this knowledge, responsible for its preservation and transmission, and you take this responsibility seriously, understanding that it represents not just practical skill but the accumulated wisdom of your people's relationship with the materials and creatures of the landscape. The light begins to fade earlier than you expect, winter's short days always seeming to end before you have accomplished everything you intended, and you return to the shelter of your dwelling as the cold deepens with the sun's departure. The fire needs building up, and you take your time with this, arranging wood carefully to ensure good airflow, positioning larger pieces to burn slowly through the night. The dwelling fills gradually with warmth, and you remove your outer layers in stages, hanging them where they will dry if they have accumulated any moisture, where the fire's heat will keep them ready for tomorrow's use. Evening meal is simple: more dried meat, some grain cooked into a thick porridge, tea brewed from herbs that have lost most of their flavor but still provide warmth and a slight nutritional supplement. You eat slowly, savoring not the taste, which is monotonous after months of similar meals, but the warmth itself, the way hot food raises your core temperature, makes your fingers and toes tingle as circulation improves. This is what winter meals have become, not about flavor or variety but about calories and warmth, about maintaining the body's ability to generate heat in the face of cold that constantly tries to steal it away. After eating, you turn your attention to a project you have been contemplating for several days: the construction of a new pair of boots for next winter. The current season's boots, while still serviceable, are showing signs of wear that suggest they will not last through another year of hard use. You have set aside materials for this project: a large piece of elk hide from an autumn hunt, rabbit fur for lining, sinew for stitching, and a supply of small leather pieces that will serve various structural purposes. The work of constructing boots is complex, requiring not just sewing skill but an understanding of three-dimensional structure, of how flat pieces of hide can be cut and stitched to create the curved shapes necessary for a boot that will fit securely without gaps where cold can enter. You begin by creating a pattern, tracing the outline of your foot on a piece of birch bark, marking not just length and width but also the contours of your heel and the shape of your arch. This pattern will guide the cutting of the hide, help ensure that the finished boot will fit properly. As you work, you remember learning this skill from an elder who is no longer living, who spent an entire winter teaching you not just the mechanics of construction but the reasoning behind each step, explaining how the placement of each seam affects durability, how the angle of each cut influences the final fit, how the choice of materials for different parts of the boot creates a finished product that is more than the sum of its parts. That elder worked slowly, insisting that you not rush, that you develop the patience necessary to do the work correctly, because boots made poorly will fail precisely when you need them most, will let in water or cold, or will come apart when you are far from shelter and unable to repair them. You cut the hide carefully, following the pattern but adjusting slightly based on your knowledge of how this particular hide behaves, how it stretches in certain directions and holds firm in others. Each cut is deliberate, considered, because once made it cannot be undone, because waste in these circumstances is not just inefficient but potentially dangerous, reducing the resources available for other necessary projects. The work absorbs your complete attention, quieting the restless inner voice that winter can amplify, providing a focus that is almost meditative in its intensity. The construction will take many evenings to complete, will require numerous stages of fitting and adjustment, but you are not hurried. Winter still has weeks to run, and the work itself serves multiple purposes: creating necessary equipment for future survival, maintaining skill through practice, providing occupation during the long dark hours when there is little else to do. You stitch several seams before the light becomes too dim to work by, even supplemented by firelight, and you set the project aside with the satisfaction of having made measurable progress, of having moved from concept to concrete reality, from materials to something that is beginning to take recognizable form. The night settles around the settlement, each dwelling becoming an island of light and warmth in a sea of cold and dark, and you lie in your sleeping furs thinking about the interconnected nature of winter survival, about how every skill and every piece of knowledge supports all the others, creating a web of capability that is far more resilient than any single element. The clothing that keeps you warm depends on hunting skill to provide materials, depends on processing knowledge to transform those materials into usable form, depends on sewing skill to construct garments, depends on maintenance knowledge to keep those garments functional across time. Remove any single strand from this web and the whole structure weakens, becomes vulnerable to failure at precisely the moment when failure is most catastrophic. You sleep with the awareness that you are living inside layers of protection, the furs that cover you, the dwelling that shelters you, the community that surrounds you, the accumulated knowledge that informs every action and decision. These layers are not perfect, they can fail, can prove inadequate when conditions exceed their design parameters. But they represent the best available response to conditions that would otherwise be unsurvivable, and in this representation lies the entire history of human adaptation to environments that are indifferent to human need. Morning comes eventually, as it always does, and you wake to discover that the cold has moderated further, that the extreme temperatures of several days ago have given way to conditions that, while still winter, are almost comfortable by comparison. You can hear activity outside earlier than usual, voices calling, the sounds of people moving with slightly less caution, taking advantage of the relative warmth to accomplish tasks that have been deferred during the worst of the cold. You join this activity, stepping outside without the multiple layers that extreme cold requires, finding that a single coat and your basic layers suffice for comfort. The settlement has the feeling of a community emerging from siege, people greeting each other with genuine warmth, sharing observations about the improved conditions, speculating about whether this moderation signals the beginning of winter's end or merely a brief respite before more cold descends. You make your way to the dwelling where the family with young children lives, the one whose smoke output you noticed was minimal. You bring with you an armload of wood, good dry pieces that will burn efficiently, and you approach the dwelling not with announcement but simply entering the communal space, adding your wood to their diminished pile, exchanging brief greetings with the father who nods acknowledgement without effusive thanks, understanding as you do that this is simply how the community functions. That help flows where it is needed without elaborate ceremony or the creation of permanent debt. The children are playing outside in the relative warmth, and you watch them for a moment, observing how even the youngest, barely able to walk steadily, is bundled in carefully constructed layers, a small coat made from rabbit pelts, tiny mittens attached to the coat's sleeves by cords to prevent loss, a hood that covers everything but the child's eyes. The child's movements are stiff with the bulk of these layers, but you understand that this stiffness is the price of warmth, that freedom of movement in these conditions is secondary to protection from cold that would otherwise be lethal. The settlement's elder, a woman whose exact age is uncertain but whose memory extends back to winters that current adults know only as stories, emerges from her dwelling and moves slowly toward the central area where people gather when weather permits. You join the loose assembly that forms around her, not in a formal circle but in the casual clustering that characterizes communities where hierarchy is subtle and based on earned respect rather than enforced authority. She speaks about previous winters, about seasons when the cold came earlier and stayed longer, when snow depths exceeded anything this current winter has produced, when game became so scarce that the community survived only by consuming stored foods down to the final reserves and then finding, just as those reserves reached their end, that the weather broke and hunting became possible again. Her stories are not dramatic in their telling but rather matter-of-fact, acknowledging both hardship and survival with the same level tone, creating a narrative that emphasizes continuity. People have faced winter before, people have survived, people will face it again. Listening to her, you understand that these stories serve multiple functions. They provide information about the range of conditions that are possible, helping the community calibrate its expectations and preparations for future seasons. They create historical memory, linking current experience to past experience, preventing each generation from having to relearn lessons that earlier generations paid dearly to acquire. And they provide reassurance, the implicit message that what feels overwhelming in the present moment is actually survivable, has been survived before, will be survived again. The gathering disperses as gradually as it formed, people returning to their tasks and their dwellings, but the effect of the elders' words persists, creating a subtle shift in the community's collective mood. The oppressive weight of winter remains, but it feels slightly less absolute, slightly more manageable, because you have been reminded that it is not permanent, that it exists within a larger cycle that will eventually turn toward spring regardless of how distant that turn currently seems. You stand at the threshold of spring, though winter has not yet loosened its hold entirely. The light that filters through the smoke hole above carries a different quality now, less gray, more silver, tinged with the pale gold promise of longer days. You have worn your winter garments for so many months that they have become inseparable from your sense of self, a second skin that remembers every storm you weathered, every fire you tended, every morning you woke beneath frost-crusted furs and chose to rise anyway. The elk-hide tunic bears the salt stains of labor along its shoulders. The wolf fur collar shows where your jaw has brushed it 10,000 times. The mittens your daughter made have been repaired twice, the sinew stitches forming small constellations across the palms where the work was hardest. The season of deepest cold has passed, though the snow still lies thick beyond the dwelling. You have survived, and so has everyone you were responsible for keeping alive. This knowledge settles in your chest with a weight both heavy and sweet, like the feeling of setting down a burden you have carried so long you forgot it was there. The winter was not easy, few winters are, but you move through the final weeks of it with the quiet confidence of someone who has learned the languages of wool, fur, and hide, who has become fluent in the grammar of survival written in fiber and skin. Your son has taken to accompanying you on the late winter foraging trips, when the snow begins to soften and the first brave plants push green shoots toward the light. He wears the rabbit skin cap you made for him 2 winters ago, now slightly too small but still serviceable, and the deerskin coat that once belonged to his older sister. These garments have histories, stories sewn into every seam. The coat saw 3 children through their early years. The mittens he wears were first made for his uncle, who died before he was born. There is comfort in this continuity, in the way good work outlasts the hands that made it, protecting generations in sequence like a promise kept across time. He asks you questions as you walk through the forest, his breath visible in the cold air, his steps careful in the deep snow. He wants to know how you knew where to set the snares that caught the rabbits whose fur now lines his hood. He wants to understand why some trees hold their bark better than others for harvesting cordage. He wants to learn the songs that make the work of scraping hides go faster, the ones your mother taught you, and her mother taught her, stretching back through generations you can no longer name but whose knowledge lives in your hands and voice. You answer him patiently, knowing that these lessons are the true inheritance you have to give. The material goods, the furs, the hides, the woven cloth, will wear out eventually, will be passed on or buried with their owners or recycled into new forms. But the knowledge of how to create these things, how to read the landscape for the materials of survival, how to transform the raw gifts of animals and plants into protection against the killing cold, this knowledge is the armor that cannot be taken away, the warmth that survives every winter. You show him a stand of cattails at the edge of the frozen marsh, their brown heads heavy with fluff. In another month, you tell him, these will be ready to harvest. The down from cattails makes excellent insulation for boot linings, mixed with rabbit fur and felted with moisture and pressure. He reaches out to touch one of the stalks, careful not to break it, learning the textures of future use. You remember standing exactly here with your own mother, learning this same lesson, your hand reaching out just as his does now, the continuity of knowledge passing like light through clear water, generation to generation, unbroken. The dwelling you return to in the evening is warm with the heat of bodies and fire, the air thick with the smell of stew and smoke and the particular scent of well-worn leather and fur. The family has gathered, as they do most nights, to work on the small tasks that fill the dark hours, mending, stitching, telling stories. Your mother sits near the fire, her hands still nimble despite her age, working a piece of softened deerskin with an awl and a length of sinew, repairing a pouch that tore during the winter's use. Her fingers move with the automatic precision of someone who has performed this action thousands of times, who could do it blind, who will probably do it until the day her hands grow too stiff to hold the tools. She hums as she works, a melody without words that you have heard all your life, that probably stretches back beyond her own childhood to times when your people wore different styles of clothing but still faced the same essential need for warmth, for protection, for the transformation of animal and plant into armor against winter's assault. You find yourself humming along, the sound a bridge between past and present, between the knowledge she carries and the knowledge you will pass forward. Your daughter has spread out her weaving project on a cleared section of floor, an ambitious piece, larger than anything she has attempted before, meant to become a heavy blanket for her own household when she leaves to join her partner's family in the settlement across the valley. She has chosen a pattern of interlocking diamonds, traditional but executed with her own variations in the borders. The wool is good quality, traded from the herders to the north, already cleaned and carded and dyed in shades of brown and cream and a deep blue achieved with woad and long soaking. She works the vertical warps with concentration, her fingers moving with increasing confidence, though she still pauses occasionally to check the tension or to ask you for guidance on a difficult passage. You kneel beside her, examining her work with the critical eye of someone who knows both the standards of quality and the importance of encouragement. The weaving is good, not perfect, but good, showing steady improvement from her earlier attempts. The selvages are mostly even, the weft packed tight enough to create a durable fabric, the pattern emerging clearly from the intersections of thread. You tell her this, pointing out the places where her technique has improved, offering gentle suggestions for maintaining consistent tension in the difficult corner areas. She listens with the focused attention of someone who cares deeply about mastering a skill, who understands that the quality of her weaving will directly affect the warmth and comfort of those she loves. The blanket she is making will take weeks more to complete, but when it is finished, it will serve her household for years, perhaps decades. It will wrap children not yet born. It will be pulled over shivering bodies on the coldest nights, offering comfort woven from wool, yes, but also from patience and care and the accumulated knowledge of generations of weavers who understood that fabric is not just covering but a form of love made tangible, a way of protecting those you cannot always be present to shelter with your own body. Your partner sits across the fire, working on the final stages of a pair of winter boots for next season. No point in waiting until autumn when the work is already pressing. These boots are for you, meant to replace the ones you have worn for 3 winters now, whose soles have been patched so many times that they are more repair than original material. The new boots are beautiful in their functionality, built from heavy elk hide with the hair left on for insulation, the seams sealed with a mixture of rendered fat and pine pitch to keep out moisture, the interior lined with felted wool and shredded cedar bark for warmth. They are large, ungainly objects, but you know from experience how precious they will be next winter, how the difference between good boots and poor ones can mean the difference between productive work and frostbitten toes, between mobility and confinement. Your partner works with steady focus, pulling the sinew stitches tight, ensuring that every seam is strong enough to withstand months of hard use in snow and ice and freezing mud. This is work that requires both strength and precision, and you watch with appreciation as familiar hands move through familiar motions, building protection for your feet with the same care that you build protection for the whole family through your various labors. There is something deeply comforting in this reciprocal work, in the way each person's skills contribute to the collective survival, in the way winter armor is built not by individuals in isolation but by families and communities working together, sharing knowledge, distributing the enormous labor of staying alive. The fire burns low, and your son adds more wood, carefully, the way you taught him, placing the split logs so they catch efficiently, maintaining heat without creating dangerous flames that might throw sparks onto the furs and hides that surround the living space. He has learned this skill well, understanding that fire management is as crucial to winter survival as any garment, that the interplay of flame and fur, heat and insulation, forms the complete system that makes life possible in this cold place. You settle into your own evening work, a pair of mittens that need reinforcement before next winter. The leather palms have worn thin from use, and you are sewing on patches of heavier hide, doubling the material in the areas that take the most stress. This is the endless cycle of maintenance that winter clothing demands, the constant attention to small failures before they become large ones, the preventive repairs that extend the life of each garment, that ensure you are never caught unprepared when the cold comes roaring back. It is tedious work, sometimes, this endless mending and patching and reinforcing, but you have learned to find a certain meditation in it, a rhythm that quiets the mind and creates space for reflection. You think about all the winters you have survived, each one adding to your knowledge, each one teaching you something new about the materials you work with, the techniques you employ, the balance of preparation and adaptation that survival requires. You think about the winters before you were born, the ones your parents and grandparents survived, the long chain of cold seasons stretching back to the earliest days of your people in this place. How many hands have performed these same tasks, scraping hides, spinning fiber, stitching seams? How many fingers have pricked themselves on bone needles, have ached from cold and repetitive motion, have worked through exhaustion because the work could not wait. The knowledge you carry, the skills that allow you to transform wool and fur and skin into winter armor, did not spring fully formed from nothing. They were built slowly, over generations, through patient experimentation and careful observation, through failures that taught what not to do and successes that were remembered and passed on. Someone, long ago, first realized that animal hides could be softened by scraping and working with fat. Someone discovered that wool could be spun into thread and woven into fabric. Someone learned which plant fibers were strong enough for cordage, which furs provided the best insulation, which methods of tanning produced the most durable leather. These discoveries were not made in isolation but in the context of desperate need, of bodies threatened by cold, of children shivering in inadequate shelter, of the brutal pressure of winter forcing innovation and adaptation. The winter armor you wear and create is built on a foundation of anonymous ingenuity, on the accumulated wisdom of countless people who looked at the materials available to them and asked, how can this keep us warm? How can this keep us alive? Your mother rises from her place by the fire, moving with the stiffness of someone who has sat too long in one position. She crosses to where you sit and settles beside you, her shoulder touching yours in easy companionship. She does not speak for a long moment, just sits, her presence a comfort older than words. Then she reaches out and takes the mitten you are working on, examining your stitches with a critical eye that has not dimmed with age. She nods slightly, a gesture of approval, and hands it back. This simple exchange carries more meaning than any elaborate praise could. It says your work is good, your skills are worthy, you are fulfilling your responsibility to those who depend on you. She begins to talk, her voice quiet, meant only for you in the warm space the two of you share. She tells you stories you have heard before but never tire of hearing, stories of winters in her youth, of storms that lasted for weeks, of springs that came late and grudging, of the year when the hunting was poor and the community survived on stored grains and the few small animals they could trap. She tells you about the coat her own mother made for her when she was a young woman, a beautiful thing of wolf fur and elk hide that she wore until it literally fell apart from age and use, until there was no material left worth salvaging, until it had given everything it had to give. That coat kept me alive more times than I can count, she says, her fingers moving in the air as if she can still feel the texture of it. And when it was finally worn out, when I buried the pieces in thanks for its service, I felt like I was burying a friend. But I had learned from making it, from maintaining it, from living inside its protection. And that knowledge allowed me to make other coats, other garments, to keep my own children alive through their winters. The coat wore out, but the knowledge did not. That is the thing that matters most, not the objects themselves, but understanding how to make them. You nod, understanding the deeper truth she is circling around. The winter armor that protects you is temporary, mortal in the same way bodies are mortal. Everything wears out eventually. Everything frays and tears and succumbs to rot and age. But the knowledge of how to create protection, how to read the landscape for materials, how to work with your hands to transform raw gifts into survival, this knowledge can be passed on intact, renewed with each generation, growing and adapting as new innovations are added to old wisdom. The evening deepens, and one by one, family members begin to prepare for sleep. The fire is banked carefully, built up with larger logs that will burn slowly through the night, providing warmth without requiring constant attention. Furs are arranged, sleeping spaces claimed. Your daughter rolls up her weaving carefully, protecting her work from accidental damage, already thinking about tomorrow's progress. Your son checks the door coverings, making sure cold air cannot seep in through any gaps. Your partner hangs the half-finished boots in a safe place where they will not be disturbed. These small rituals of nighttime preparation have become so automatic that they require little conscious thought, but each one is important, each one a small act of care that contributes to comfort and safety. You lay out your own sleeping furs, the layers you have come to know intimately over the winter, the bear hide that forms the base, heavy and insulating, its thick fur creating a barrier between your body and the cold ground, the deer hides layered above it, softer, more flexible, the final blanket of woven wool, light but warm, its familiar way to comfort. You have slept beneath these same furs for months now, and they carry the smell of your body, the warmth of your breath, the accumulated evidence of your survival. They are not beautiful objects by any aesthetic standard, they are worn and patched and stained with use, but they have kept you alive, and that makes them more valuable than any amount of purely decorative material could ever be. Before you sleep, you perform a small ritual you have maintained throughout the winter. You run your hands over the garments you will wear tomorrow, checking for any new damage, any stress points that might need attention. The elk hide tunic is holding up well, it seems still strong despite constant wear. The fur collar remains securely attached, though you note a place where the stitching is beginning to loosen, not urgent, but something to address in the next few days. The wool leggings show no new holes, though they are felted now from moisture and pressure and friction, denser than they were at the start of winter, transformed by use into something even more functional than they began. You think about next winter, already, though spring has not yet truly arrived. You think about what will need to be made, what repaired, what replaced. The boots your partner is crafting will be ready, but your son will need new ones, his feet have grown, and the boots that fit him at the start of winter are already too small. Your daughter will be gone to her new household, but there will be a new baby in the family by then, your sister's child, and infant garments will need to be prepared, tiny things that require delicate work but are no less important than the adult clothing that takes more time to create. The rabbits you trap in early spring will provide fur for next winter's linings. The plants that emerge in summer will offer fibers for cordage and weaving. The deer that fall to hunting in autumn will give their hides for new garments, their sinew for stitching, their brains for tanning. The cycle continues, endless, the wheel of seasons turning, and you turn with it, always working, always preparing, always maintaining the skills and knowledge that keep you armored against the cold. There is a certain comfort in this continuity, in the predictability of the work, in knowing that your hands will perform these tasks as long as they are able, and then other hands will take over, continuing the ancient practice of transforming wool and fur and skin into protection, into survival, into love-made material. You settle into your furs, pulling the layers around you with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this hundreds of times. The warmth builds gradually, trapped between wool and hide and your own body heat, creating a microclimate that allows sleep despite the cold that presses against the dwelling walls. You can hear the wind outside, but it is distant, muffled, unable to reach you through the layers of protection you have built, the structure of the dwelling itself, the insulation of its walls, the furs that wrap you, the garments that never leave your body even in sleep. Your last thoughts before sleep takes you are of spring, of the work that awaits when the snow finally melts, of the gardens that will need planting and the summer gathering that will need to begin. But even these thoughts of warmer seasons are colored by the awareness of winter's inevitable return, by the knowledge that you will spend the productive months preparing for the cold ones, that this is the pattern of life in this place, the rhythm that governs survival. You do not resent this pattern. It simply is, like the sun's rising and setting, like the moon cycling through its phases, like the eternal dance of seasons that shapes everything you do. Sleep comes slowly, peacefully, your body relaxing into warmth and safety, your mind drifting through fragmentary images of all the winters you have known, all the garments you have made, all the people you have helped to keep alive. The winter armor you wear has become so familiar that you barely notice it anymore, except in moments like this, when you consciously acknowledge the miracle of it, that you can sleep warm in a place where the air outside would kill you in hours if you were exposed to it unprotected, that you can survive and even thrive in an environment that is fundamentally hostile to human life, that you have learned to take the gifts the world offers, wool from sheep, fur from wild animals, hides from deer and elk, and transform them into exactly what you need to endure. The night passes quietly. The fire burns low, then lower, its light dimming to mere embers that cast a red glow across the interior of the dwelling. Everyone sleeps, wrapped in their furs, protected by the accumulated knowledge of generations, by the patient work of hands that transformed raw materials into shelter and warmth. The wind howls outside, driving snow against the walls, but inside there is peace, the deep peace of knowing you are safe, that you have done everything necessary to ensure survival, that you can rest. Morning arrives with the pale light that seeps through the smoke hole, gray at first, then gradually brighter as the sun climbs above the horizon. You wake slowly, emerging from sleep layer by layer, becoming gradually aware of your body, the warmth of the furs around you, the cold air on your face. You do not move immediately, luxuriating for a moment in the comfort of the bed you have made, in the drowsy peace of early morning. Then you stir, the practicalities of the day asserting themselves, and you begin the process of rising, of joining the world again, of taking up once more the endless work of staying alive. Your hands reach first for the garments you removed for sleeping, not all of them, for you slept in wool and leather, but the outer layers, the heaviest furs that are too bulky to sleep in comfortably. You pull on the elk hide tunic, feeling its familiar weight settle across your shoulders. You wrap the wolf fur collar around your neck, tucking it into place. You pull on the mittens your daughter made, flexing your fingers to wake them fully. Each garment is greeting an old friend, welcoming back a familiar presence that has shared every day of the winter with you. The family stirs, one by one, each person beginning their own morning rituals. The fire is built up from its embers, fed with carefully placed kindling until flames leap again, driving back the shadows, filling the dwelling with warmth and light. Someone starts preparing the morning meal. Someone else goes out to check the snares, returning with a brace of winter-thin rabbits that will be skinned and cooked and eaten, their small bodies giving up everything they have to support the larger bodies that depend on them. The furs will be saved, of course, stretched and dried and added to the store of materials that will become next winter's armor. You step outside into the bright cold, your breath immediately visible, your face tightening in the frigid air. The snow stretches in every direction, white and pristine where no one has walked, trampled, and packed in the paths between dwellings. The sun is climbing, pale but present, its light reflecting off the snow with an intensity that makes you squint. The air smells clean, sharp, empty of the smoke and close human scent that fill the dwelling. You stand for a moment, letting the cold wash over you, feeling the protection of your winter armor between you and the lethal environment, marveling quietly at the fact of your survival. You have work to do, as always. The snares need checking. The wood pile needs replenishing. There are hides waiting to be scraped, sinew that needs preparation, repairs that cannot be postponed. But for this moment, you simply stand, breathing the cold air, feeling the sun on your face, aware of your body's warmth enclosed in wool and fur and skin, armored and protected and alive. In the dwelling behind you, your mother is beginning her day's work, her hands reaching automatically for the familiar tools, her mind already planning the tasks ahead. Your daughter is returning to her weaving, eager to see the pattern emerge more clearly with today's progress. Your son is helping your partner with some small task, learning by watching, by doing, by asking questions and receiving patient answers. The family continues, the knowledge passes forward, the ancient skills are practiced and refined and handed on. This is how winter is survived, how it has always been survived in this place. Not through single heroic acts, but through the patient accumulation of small skills, through the daily maintenance of protective garments, through the communal sharing of knowledge and labor. The winter armor you wear is not just the physical objects, the tunic and leggings and mittens and boots, but the entire web of knowledge and relationship that makes their creation possible. It is your mother's hands teaching you to scrape hides. It is your daughter learning to weave. It is your partner stitching boots for your feet, as you have made garments for others. It is the songs that make work easier, the stories that preserve technique, the quiet pride in work done well. You return inside, stamping snow from your boots, unwrapping the outer layers of fur now that you will be working in the warmth of the dwelling. The day unfolds in its familiar pattern, each hour filled with necessary labor, with small conversations, with the ongoing project of survival that requires constant attention. You work on the mittens that need repair, pulling each stitch tight, ensuring the patch is secure. Your hands move with automatic skill, leaving your mind free to wander, to think about the larger patterns, the deeper meanings. The winter armor you create and maintain is not eternal, but it does not need to be. It only needs to last long enough, through this winter, and the next, and as many as possible before it finally wears out and must be replaced. And by the time replacement is needed, you will have taught others how to make what is required, will have passed on the knowledge that is the true armor, the true protection that survives the wearing out of individual objects. There is a kind of peace in this understanding, a settling of something deep in your chest. You are part of a chain that stretches back beyond memory and will extend forward beyond your own life. The work you do, the skills you maintain, the knowledge you pass on, these things matter, not because they make you special or remarkable, but because they are necessary, because they are part of what allows human life to persist in this difficult place. The day passes, blending into others, each one similar but not identical, each one adding its small thread to the larger fabric of survival. Winter loosens its grip gradually, the days lengthening, the sun climbing higher, the snow beginning its slow surrender to spring. But you know it will return, as it always does, and when it comes again, you will be ready, armored in wool and fur and skin, protected by knowledge and skill and the labor of your hands and the hands of those you love. This is enough. This has always been enough. To survive, to maintain, to pass on what you have learned, this is the victory that winter allows, the only victory that truly matters. And wrapped in the garments you have made, surrounded by the family you have helped to keep alive, you understand that you have already won. You stand at the edge of the clearing now, as the afternoon light softens into something almost golden, the kind of light that seems to hold memory within it. The workshop behind you has grown quiet, the last threads drawn through wool, the final stitch set into leather. Your hands rest at your sides, still carrying the warmth of work, still bearing the faint scent of lanolin and smoke. The forest stretches before you in layers of shadow and pale winter sun, each tree standing separate and distinct, each branch holding its small burden of frost. You think of how many times humans have stood at edges like this one, looking into wilderness with nothing but what they could make between themselves and the cold. How many hands have worked these same materials, following the same ancient logic of survival wrapped in beauty, necessity married to craft. You begin to walk, your feet finding the path that winds between the pine trees, the one worn smooth by generations of footsteps. The cloak around your shoulders moves with you, its weight familiar now, its warmth no longer surprising but expected, trusted. You have learned how wool holds heat even when wet, how the crimp of each fiber creates tiny pockets of air that insulate better than any single solid layer could. You have learned this not from books alone but from wearing it, from feeling how your body heat builds and holds within the weave, from understanding through your skin what your ancestors understood the same way. The path descends slightly toward the stream you know runs through the valley bottom, the one that never fully freezes even in the deepest cold. You can hear it now, a distant whisper beneath the silence of snow-laden branches. This sound has always been here, in every century, in every season. The people who first learned to scrape hides and twist fibers into thread heard this same water moving over these same stones, felt the same bite of winter air against their faces, sought the same warmth you now carry wrapped around you. You pass a birch tree with pale bark peeling in thin strips, and you remember how birch bark was used too, how nothing in the forest went unused by those who understood what each material offered. The bark for containers and shelters, the inner bark for cordage and even emergency food, the wood for handles and frames. Everything connected, everything part of the same great web of use and gratitude, necessity and respect. Your breath makes small clouds in the cold air, each one visible for a moment before it dissolves into the general atmosphere. You think about breath itself, about how the clothing you wear traps a layer of your own warmth, your own body's heat, creating a microclimate between skin and world. This is what armor means in winter. Not hardness but softness. Not deflection but absorption. The yielding that protects. The stream comes into view through the trees, a dark ribbon of movement in the stillness. You approach slowly, drawn by the sound of it, by the life that persists even when everything else seems held in suspension. At the water's edge the ground is softer, less frozen, and you can see where animals have come to drink, their tracks pressed into mud that hardened in the night cold. Deer prints, delicate and paired. The broader marks of what might have been a fox or small dog. You crouch beside the stream, your cloak pooling around you, and dip your fingers into the water. It is shockingly cold, colder than the air, and the sensation travels up your arm like a message, like a reminder. This is the world without covering, without the careful work of hands. This is what skin alone would face, what every living thing must negotiate in its own way. The deer grow their winter coats, dense and hollow-haired. The fox's fur thickens and pales. The fish slow their cold blood and wait in deeper pools. And you wear what your kind has always worn, the second skins, the gathered warmth, the stitched and fulled and tanned. You dry your hand on your tunic and stand again, looking downstream to where the water disappears around a bend between dark pines. Somewhere beyond that bend, beyond many such bends, the stream joins a river, and the river flows to other rivers, and eventually to the sea. Along all those waterways, humans have lived and made their shelters, have hunted and gathered and learned to keep warm. Different climates demanded different solutions. On the coasts, seal and sea otter. In the plains, bison and elk. In the mountains, sheep and goat, and the careful husbandry that kept both humans and animals alive through seasons that would kill either alone. You follow the stream's edge for a while, walking where the bank is firm enough to hold your weight, feeling how the temperature drops near the water, how the air carries more moisture here. Your wool absorbs it without feeling wet, without losing its warmth. This was the discovery that changed everything for northern peoples, the realization that wool, unlike plant fibers, could keep you warm even when damp. That a woolen cloak could be your shelter and your warmth, that you could sleep wrapped in fleece beneath stars and wake alive when others would not. The light shifts as you walk, the sun lowering though it is still afternoon, the angle of winter always bringing early twilight. You think of how the shortest days must have felt to people without certain shelter, how the long darkness of winter nights shaped everything about how they lived. The need to preserve food, to maintain fire, to have enough fuel and enough warm covering to last until spring. How failure in any of these areas meant death, not metaphorical or distant, but immediate and cold. You come to a place where a fallen tree bridges the stream, its trunk silvered with age and weather, its roots torn from earth on one bank while its crown rests tangled on the other. You pause here, considering. The bridge is wide enough, solid enough. You step onto it carefully, feeling with your feet for balance, your arms out slightly, the cloak's weight helping to center you. Halfway across you stop and look down at the water sliding beneath you, dark and quick, carrying small pieces of ice at its edges. You think about crossings, about thresholds. About how every piece of knowledge traveled across distances like this, person to person, generation to generation. The woman who first noticed that certain hides became softer when chewed. The man who discovered that urine helped clean and process wool. The child who saw how plant fibers twisted together were stronger than either alone. These moments of discovery, these small revelations, they happened in lives like yours, in hands like yours. Not in laboratories or great institutions, but at streambanks and campfires, in moments of need and observation, in the patient trying and trying again that characterizes all human craft. You are standing on a bridge they built, though they never saw you, never knew you would exist. Their knowledge holds you up. Their patient work keeps you warm. You step down onto the far bank and continue walking, now on a part of the forest floor you do not know as well. The trees here grow more densely, the understory thick with frozen ferns and the brown stalks of plants gone dormant. You move carefully, pushing through, feeling how your leggings protect your legs from scratches and thorns, how your boots keep your feet dry in the shallow drifts. This is the gift, you think. Not the warmth alone but the freedom it provides. The ability to move through hostile country, to range beyond the immediate safe zone, to explore and travel and expand the known world. Without protection from cold, humans would have remained in narrow bands of temperate land, would never have reached the northern forests or the high mountains or the Arctic coasts. It was clothing, more than any other technology, that allowed the spread across the globe. You push through a last stand of young firs and emerge into another clearing, this one larger than the first, with several old stumps showing where trees were cut long ago, they were taken for building or burning. In the center of the clearing stands a cairn, stones piled carefully into a waist-high marker, the purpose unclear but the intention obvious. Someone wanted to mark this place, to say, "Here, remember here." You walk to the cairn and rest your hand on the topmost stone. It is cold, almost burning with cold, the kind of cold that stone holds long after air has warmed. You leave your hand there anyway, feeling the temperature equalize slightly, your body heat flowing into the stone, lost but given freely. This is what you have learned on this long day of thinking about wool and fur and skin, this day of remembering how humans learned to survive what should have killed them. That warmth is not something you simply have. It is something you create, something you maintain, something you share. The stone beneath your palm holds the cold of winter, but it also holds the warmth of your hand, at least for a moment. When you remove your hand, that warmth will dissipate quickly, will bleed back into the general coldness. But for now, there is this exchange, this small transfer of heat from living flesh to ancient stone. It feels important somehow, though you could not say exactly why. You lower your hand and walk around the cairn slowly, looking at how it is built, how each stone is placed to support the others, how the structure is both solid and simple. Like weaving, like stitching, like all the crafts that built the quiet armor. One piece, then another, then another. Patience and attention and the willingness to learn from failure. The sun drops lower still, and the shadows lengthen across the clearing, blue and purple in the snow, golden where they touch tree trunks and the eastern faces of stones. You realize you should begin walking back, that twilight comes quickly and the forest is different in darkness. But you stand a moment longer, reluctant to leave this place, this marker of something you cannot name. Finally you turn and retrace your steps, following your own tracks back through the young firs, back to the fallen tree bridge, back along the stream. The water sounds different now, or perhaps you hear it differently, its constant voice a reassurance that some things persist regardless of human attention. The stream does not care about your careful stitching or your understanding of felting. It simply flows, has always flowed, will continue to flow when you and all your knowing are gone. But for now, you are here. Warm in your wool, protected by your carefully made clothing, walking through winter like countless others before you. The knowledge flows through you as the stream flows over its stones, carried forward, passed on, adapted and refined but never lost. Each generation adds something, notices something, improves some small aspect of the craft. The through line is unbroken. You cross the bridge again, more confident now, your balance sure. On the far side you turn upstream, taking a different path back toward the workshop and village, wanting to see the light from a new angle, wanting to prolong this day a little further. The path here is narrower, less used, and branches catch at your cloak, small twigs leaving traces of dark bark on the wool. You brush them off without concern. Wool can be cleaned, can be brushed and combed and made fresh again. This too is part of its gift, its durability, its willingness to be worn hard and still perform its function. The trees thin as you climb a slight rise, and suddenly you can see further, across the valley to the hills beyond. They roll away in shades of gray and blue-green, each ridge distinct, the furthest barely visible in the haze of distance. Snow covers their northern slopes more heavily, while southern faces show patches of dark earth and exposed stone. This is the geography that shaped how people lived, where they settled, how they moved with seasons. In valleys they could farm and keep animals, build permanent homes, store food and fuel. On the heights they hunted and gathered, traveled between valleys, kept watch for weather and for danger. Each place demanded its own understanding, its own adaptation. The wool that worked in the valley might not be enough on the exposed ridge. The leather sufficient for daily work might fail on a long winter journey. People learned by necessity, by trial, by the harsh teaching of cold that forgives no ignorance. You stand at the top of the rise, looking out across the layered landscape, feeling the wind that moves more freely here. It finds the gaps in your clothing, the places where weave and stitching meet, and enters like a cold finger, a reminder that protection is never absolute. Even the best-made garments have their limits. Even the warmest cloak cannot defeat winter entirely, can only negotiate with it, can only say, "Not today, not yet, I am still here." The wind carries the scent of more snow coming, a particular sharpness in the air that you have learned to recognize. Tomorrow perhaps, or tonight, the sky will open again and add to the white already covering the ground. And in that snow, people will move as they have always moved, wrapped in their gathered warmth, carrying with them the accumulated knowledge of how to survive. You begin to descend the rise, heading now toward the visible roofline of the village, the thin threads of smoke rising from chimneys into the pale sky. Each of those fires represents work, represents wood cut and stacked, represents someone feeding fuel to flame, maintaining the warmth that makes life possible. The fires burn in stone hearths or iron stoves, technologies built on earlier technologies, each innovation small but significant. But always, around those fires, people wear their second skins, their wool and fur and leather, because fire alone is not enough. You must hold its warmth, must trap it close to your body, must carry it with you when you move away from the flames. The first buildings appear through the trees, the workshop where you spent the morning, the barn where sheep huddle together sharing their collective warmth. You can hear their occasional bleating, the sound carrying clearly in the cold air. Those sheep, you think, they carry their own winter armor, the wool that will be sheared in spring, that will pass through so many hands and processes before it returns to keep another winter at bay. The circle continues, season to season, year to year. You pass between buildings into the village proper, your boots making soft sounds on packed snow. A few people are visible, moving on their own errands, each one dressed against the cold, each one bearing the evidence of centuries of learned survival. You nod to a woman carrying a basket, her shawl wrapped tight, her breath making clouds. She nods back, a simple acknowledgement of shared existence in winter, of the quiet solidarity of those who understand cold. You walk to your own door, the one that opens into the small dwelling you call home, the space you have warmed and shaped to suit your needs. You pause with your hand on the latch, looking back once more at the forest edge, at the last of the day's light touching the highest branches. Soon it will be full dark, the long winter night that demands fire and shelter and careful preparation. But you are ready. Your clothing will keep you warm. Your walls will break the wind. Your knowledge will see you through. You open the door and step inside, into the relative warmth, the accumulated heat of the day still held in the thick walls, in the stones around the hearth. You close the door gently, shutting out the last of the exterior cold, creating the boundary between inside and outside, between protected and exposed. The room welcomes you with its familiar shadows, its simple furnishings, the scent of wood smoke and wool and the particular smell of home. You remove your cloak slowly, feeling the weight lift from your shoulders, feeling how much warmth it has held close to your body. You hang it on its peg near the door where it will be ready when you need it again. Your fingers work at the ties of your tunic, loosening them, preparing to exchange the outdoor layers for softer indoor ones. Each piece of clothing you remove represents a decision, a choice made by someone long ago about how to stay warm, a choice that worked and so was remembered, was repeated, was refined over generations. Dressed now in lighter wool, comfortable and free, you move to the hearth where coals still glow from the morning's fire. You add kindling carefully, watching as the small flames catch and grow, as the light increases and the heat begins to radiate more strongly. The fire is a piece of the sun, you think, captured and tamed, held here in your small space to push back the dark and cold. But without the wool, without the careful layers that trap the heat close, even this fire would not be enough. The two work together, flame and fleece, each making the other more effective. You settle into your chair, the one position to catch the hearth's warmth, and allow yourself to simply sit, to let the day's walking and thinking and remembering settle into your bones. Your hands rest on the chair's arms, the same hands that have worked wool and leather today, that carry in their muscle memory the motions learned by countless others. You are a link in a chain so long its beginning is lost to history, a keeper of knowledge that predates language, that lives in the hands themselves. Outside, the darkness completes itself, and the first stars appear in the narrow band of sky visible through your window. Those stars have witnessed every winter that ever was, have shone down on every human who ever struggled to stay warm, who ever learned to work hide or twist fiber or stitch pieces into holes. They are indifferent, those stars, but they are also constant, the same lights that guided travelers home, that marked the seasons, that reminded people they were part of something vast and ongoing. You rise after a time and move to the window, looking out at the village settling into night. Lights show in windows, golden squares in the darkness, each one marking a hearth, a family, a small zone of warmth maintained against the universal cold. This is what humans do, you think. We create pockets of livability in places that would kill us. We negotiate with reality through knowledge and craft and the willingness to learn from those who came before. We wear our armor quietly, not in battle but in the simple daily act of survival. The night deepens and you turn from the window, moving through your small space with the ease of long familiarity, preparing for sleep. You bank the fire carefully, arranging coals and ash so heat will persist until morning, so you will not wake to frozen air and dead hearth. You pull the bed's coverings back, revealing the layers of wool and fur that will keep you warm through the night, that will work even while you sleep, holding heat, protecting, allowing rest. You slide beneath the covers and feel their weight settle over you, feel the immediate sense of enclosure, of safety. The wool against your skin, the fur at the edges, the woven blanket on top. Each layer serves its purpose, each one part of the system that makes sleep possible in winter, that allows the body to rest without fighting cold, to restore itself in peace. Lying in the darkness, you think about all the people who have lain like this, wrapped in their gathered warmth, protected by their knowledge and craft. You think about the first person who understood that wool could be spun, that it would hold together and create something stronger than loose fleece. You think about the first person who realized that scraping and working a hide would make it supple, would make it possible to wear. You think about all the small discoveries that accumulated into the system you now take for granted, the quiet armor that has carried humanity through every winter since understanding began. Your breathing slows as sleep approaches, your body relaxing into warmth, into safety, into the trust that you will wake in the morning still warm, still protected. The house creaks softly around you, wood responding to temperature, settling into its own rest. The fire whispers in the hearth, a small voice in the darkness. Outside, the night holds the forest and the village, the stream and the hills, everything locked in winter's grip, everything waiting for spring's release. But you do not think of spring now. You think of this moment, this warmth, this safety that comes from knowledge applied with patience and care. You think of wool and fur and skin, of the gifts that animals provide and humans learn to transform. You think of thread and sinew and the careful stitching that holds pieces together into wholes. You think of how warmth is made, not found, how it requires work and attention and the willingness to honor what has been learned before. Sleep comes gently, wrapping around you like another layer, like the softest wool. Your last conscious thought is of continuity, of the chain unbroken, of hands passing knowledge to hands across the vast distance of time. You are held by this knowledge, supported by it, kept alive by it. The quiet armor surrounds you, invisible but present, the accumulated wisdom of species learning to survive what should have been impossible. And in the morning you will wake to cold air and warm blankets, and you will rise and stir the fire and dress again in your layers, and you will move through another day, wearing the armor that makes life possible. The work will continue because it must, because it always has, because this is what it means to be human in a world that does not care whether you survive. You learn. You make. You protect yourself and those around you. You pass the knowledge on. The night holds you gently in its dark hand, and you sleep, wrapped in wool, covered in fur, protected by the skin of animals and the skill of human hands, warm and safe and held by everything that came before, everything that will continue after, the long chain of making and learning and surviving that stretches back to the first cold night when someone first understood that warmth could be carried, could be worn, could be made into armor against the dark.